There's a particular kind of silence that blankets a small Oregon town just before a storm, the hush where even lost dogs stop howling. Detective Reed Callahan felt that silence prick his skin as he crossed the vacant lot behind the derelict Texaco, following a lead that had already gone cold. Then a low, broken growl split the air. He swung his flashlight, and the beam froze on a pair of amber eyes reflecting back at him with haunted familiarity. The dog was little more than bone and resolve, yet Reed knew him instantly. Ranger. 3 winters earlier, the shepherd's courage had dragged Reed out of an inferno. Protocol said the dog recovered. Retired somewhere sunny. Protocol lied. Now Ranger cowered beneath a rust-eaten canopy, his collar gone, fur caked in grime, but the eyes still held the echo of a promise. I did not leave you, you left me. As Reed knelt, memories collided with a new dread. Someone had taken this loyal life and twisted it for darker work. Why else would Ranger recoil from a human voice, yet stare defiantly into fate? Ahead waits a labyrinth of falsified transfers, midnight auctions, and a conspiracy that feeds on forgotten heroes. You can keep walking or lean closer, but understand, once you look into Ranger's eyes, you'll have to follow them to the end. The wind in Marigold Ridge had a way of creeping under collars, into bones. It wasn't loud, just constant, the kind of hush that made everything feel like a memory. Detective Reed Callahan pulled into the lot behind the shuttered Texaco station, tires crunching over a smear of brittle gravel. The cruiser's engine gave a final exhale before fading into silence. He sat for a moment, gloved hands on the wheel, watching the late afternoon light stretch thin across the cracked asphalt. In the rearview mirror, a deflated tire swing bobbed faintly on a bare branch. The gas station had been abandoned for years, a skeleton of its former self, scrawled with old graffiti and half-frozen vines. Reed wasn't supposed to be here. Not exactly. His report said he was following up on a lead about a car theft ring. Multiple stripped vehicles had been found dumped in this part of town, where no cameras blinked and no neighbors peeked. But something else had brought him here today. Not instinct, not even duty. Something keener. He stepped out of the vehicle, boots pressing into patches of black ice, breath billowing in the frigid air. The sky overhead was the color of dull steel. Winter had pressed its weight across the town, softening the world into a bleak watercolor. Reed zipped his jacket higher, eyes sweeping the vacant lot. And then he heard it, a sound so faint he might have missed it if not for the absolute silence surrounding him. A scrape, maybe, like fur against metal, or claws on rust. He paused mid-step, his hand instinctively brushing the grip of his sidearm, but didn't draw. Instead, he listened again. The sound came once more, followed by something else. A slow exhale. Not human, not threatening, just worn. Reed followed it. He moved past the collapsed canopy where gas pumps once stood proudly. Now the metal roof sagged. Vines, threading through holes like time, had tried to stitch it shut. He rounded the back of the station, past a broken bench, and halted. There, curled against the skeletal remains of pump number 3, was a shape. A dog. At first, Reed thought it might have been dead. It was so still. But then one eye fluttered open, followed by the other. Amber. Clouded at the edges, but unmistakable. Their gaze locked, and something inside Reed fractured. He didn't move. He couldn't. A sound rose in his throat, but never left. The dog's fur was matted and patchy, streaks of tan and black buried beneath grime. Its ribs pressed against its skin like a collapsed tent, and one paw was tucked underneath a trembling frame as though trying to disappear. But the eyes, they held something Reed hadn't seen in 3 years. Recognition. He took a step forward, slow, careful. The dog didn't bark, didn't run. It only stared. "Ranger?" he whispered. The name barely left his lips before it hit him. The mission, the explosion, the fire, the day his world changed. Ranger had saved him then, dragging his body through fire and shrapnel when his own legs gave out. Reed had woken up in the ICU with 3 fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, and no word on the dog who saved him. The official report said, reassigned for security protocol. Unofficially, Ranger vanished. Until now, the dog flinched at the sound of his name, ears pressed flat against its skull. It tried to scoot backward, only managing an inch before collapsing against the rusted metal post. Reed dropped to one knee, his jeans soaking through in the slush and salt. "It's me," he said, voice breaking like it hadn't in years. "It's Reed." Ranger's chest rose and fell rapidly. There was no wag, no crawl forward. Only eyes wide with something between fear and confusion. Like he couldn't decide if this was rescue or another hallucination brought on by hunger and cold. Reed saw the scar then faint, almost invisible beneath the filth, running diagonally across Ranger's left flank. He remembered that scar. It had come from a mission in the canyon foothills. Reed had taken a hit, and Ranger shielded his side as they fled under fire. The wound had needed 12 stitches. Reed still remembered the way the dog didn't whimper, not even once. He reached out slowly now, palm up, fingers trembling from more than the cold. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. A voice cut through the wind, raspy, female, worn. "You know that dog?" Reed turned to see an elderly woman standing just a few feet away. She wore a thick lavender coat, a red knit hat pulled low over wisps of gray, and wheeled a small wagon filled with thermoses and crushed cracker boxes. Her gaze wasn't hostile, just tired. Familiar with sadness. "He's been there for months," she said. "Won't come near nobody." Reed stood slowly. "You feed him?" "When I can. Scraps mostly. He won't take food from my hand no more. Just stares like he's waiting on somebody never coming back." She pointed toward the northern ridge line, beyond the tree line. "Always faces that way when it gets quiet." Reed followed her finger, but the forest offered no clues, just bare trunks and low fog. When he looked back, the dog hadn't moved. "What's your name?" he asked. "Martha," she replied. "Been here longer than the dirt." Reed nodded. "Detective Callahan." Martha's eyes narrowed slightly. "That dog of yours, then?" "He was," Reed said quietly. "His name's Ranger." She nodded once, then looked down at the trembling animal. "Well," she said, her voice softening, "he remembers you. Just don't know yet if he trusts the memory." Reed crouched again. "Neither do I," he whispered. He stayed like that for a while, just breathing, just being as snow began to fall in hesitant flakes, melting the moment they touched the rusted ground. The air between them was still fragile, like a thread stretched too tight. Ranger didn't blink. He didn't growl. He simply watched Reed with eyes too tired to trust, too hollow to hope. Reed stayed low, his breath fogging in short bursts, the snow whispering softly onto the rusted pump above their heads. He didn't try to move closer, just knelt there, hand still outstretched. "It's me," he said again, gently this time. "You remember, don't you?" That was when Ranger flinched. A barely there recoil, but full of history legs coiling under him like he expected pain to follow the voice. Not violence. Punishment. The kind that teaches even a dog to stop believing in names. From behind him, boots crunched on gravel. Slow, deliberate, not threatening. Reed turned his head just enough to see her, the elderly woman he'd glimpsed before now standing with both hands gripping the handle of her red wagon, its wheels slightly cocked on the uneven ground. She wore oversized gloves, the fingers patched and fraying, and a scarf tied too tightly around her neck. "That dog yours, mister?" she asked, voice low and rough, like it had spent years talking to wind. Reed didn't answer right away. His eyes went back to Ranger, whose ribs rose and fell too fast beneath the mess of his coat. "Was?" he said finally. The woman stepped closer, dragging the wagon with a clatter over ice. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze fixed on the dog. "He's been lying there off and on since October. Maybe longer. Always comes back to this spot. I think it's the smell of diesel. Or maybe he just remembers something." Reed straightened slowly, brushing the slush from his knee. "You been feeding him?" "Only what I got. Scrap bread, canned sardines if I find him on sale. He won't come near me no more. Used to, at first, but then." She paused, eyes narrowing as if she could see things Reed couldn't. Then he changed. "How?" Started whining in his sleep. Growling at engines. Jumped through a fence once when a horn went off near the diner. Spent the next 3 days under the canopy. Wouldn't come out even for food. Reed looked back at Ranger, who hadn't moved, his body still pressed low, almost flush to the frozen ground, ears flattened, but his eyes tracked every word. The woman tilted her head slightly. "You said he was yours." "Yeah," Reed murmured. He was my partner. A quiet passed between them, thick as frost. I'm Reed, he added, extending a hand. Martha, she replied, ignoring the handshake but nodding once. You police? Reed nodded. Well, damn, she said softly, her breath curling out like steam. He's police too, ain't he? Reed crouched again, unable to answer for a second. His voice tightened. He saved my life, pulled me out of a fire when half my side was torn open. Last time I saw him, they said he was being reassigned. That was 3 years ago. Martha's lips pressed into a line. And now, he's here. Chewed up like an old boot and tossed aside. Something in her tone wasn't judgmental. It was protective. Reed shifted his position and leaned a little closer. He flinched when I said his name. He flinches at shadows too, Martha replied, eyes not leaving Ranger. He don't sleep long. Gets these little twitches like he's running in place but stuck in a cage. Reed swallowed hard. Have you ever touched him? Not in months. He won't allow it. I tried with a towel once when it got real cold, but he just looked at me like I was doing him a disservice, like he was supposed to suffer. Reed's breath caught. That, more than anything else, felt like Ranger. He shifted onto both knees now, slowly lowering himself until he was almost at eye level with the dog again. I'm gonna try something. Martha didn't object. She simply watched. Ranger, Reed whispered. I see you, buddy. The dog's ears twitched slightly. I know it hurts. I know they lied. But I never stopped looking for you. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of jerky, the kind he used to keep in his belt pouch during training drills. He unwrapped it carefully, the crackle of plastic sharp in the cold, and laid the piece gently on the ground just within reach. Ranger didn't move. Reed didn't expect him to. He's got a scar, Reed said to Martha. Left flank. Barely visible now, but it came from shrapnel. We both took hits on the same op. They stitched us side by side. Martha raised an eyebrow. Still got your scar? Reed nodded, pressing his palm against his left side. I feel it every time it's going to snow. She gave a dry chuckle, then looked back down. He flinched when you spoke. Yeah, but he didn't run. That's something. I don't think he can. Not anymore. No, she said softly. I think he's waiting. For what? For someone who never came back. The words hit harder than Reed wanted to admit. He knelt there for several long minutes. The snow had started again, lazy flakes drifting down like ash. Ranger blinked slowly, his chin just barely lifted off the ground now, nose twitching near the strip of jerky. Martha bent down, reached into her wagon, and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper half-eaten, the bread slightly stale. She leaned in and placed it gently near the jerky. He won't take it from my hand anymore, she muttered. Not since mid-November. They waited. Ranger lifted his head a fraction. His eyes flicked from Reed to the food, then back. Tentatively, almost against his own will, he stretched his neck forward, inch by inch, until his nose touched the wax paper. He sniffed, then took a small bite. No growl, no flinch. Just chewing. Reed felt something crack open in his chest. Relief, guilt, love, all tangled and raw. Martha, still crouched beside him, whispered without looking, You better do right by him, detective. I seen men make promises to dogs, then leave when it got too hard. I'm not one of them. She looked at him, really looked. Then don't prove me wrong. Ranger licked the last crumb from the concrete, then rested his head back on his paws. He didn't move closer, but he didn't move away either. And that was enough. For now, the silence between them stretched long. Reed, Martha, and the dog who used to charge into gunfire without hesitation, now barely lifting his head off the frozen concrete. Ranger had taken 2 small bites of the jerky, maybe 3, but the third he chewed slower, like even swallowing cost more energy than it was worth. Then he laid his chin back down on the slush-darkened pavement and closed his eyes, though they didn't stay shut, just flickered, wary. Reed didn't speak. Not yet. His breath curled in quiet spirals as he stayed crouched beside him, the cold sinking into his knees and through the thin fabric at his wrist. His gloved hand rested inches from the dog's paw, not reaching, not demanding, just there. Behind him, Martha adjusted her grip on the wagon handle. She let out a sigh, the kind people do when they've watched too many things fade. You look like a man trying to patch a hole that's been leaking for years, she said. Reed turned his head slightly. Feels like that. Martha didn't move closer. She stood rooted in place, her gaze steady. Don't mean to pry, but I've seen this before. What's this? She nodded toward Ranger. A dog that gave everything, then got nothing. Reed looked down again. Ranger hadn't moved, but his ears had twitched faintly, like the words stirred something buried beneath the frost and fear. You said you were his partner? Martha continued. Then you disappeared, just like the others. Reed's jaw tightened. They told me he'd been reassigned. They wouldn't let me see him, wouldn't even tell me where he went. And so, reassigned, she repeated like it tasted wrong. That what they're calling it now? He said nothing. Martha's voice dropped, not cruel, but firm. Whatever they did, you didn't stop it. And now he's here, freezing himself to death under an old gas pump. Reed turned fully toward her now. I didn't know. If I had, I believe you, she interrupted. But belief don't feed him, don't warm him, don't undo 3 years of God knows what. That landed hard, because it was true. You planning to take him with you? She asked. If he'll come. Martha studied him for a moment, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small paper bag. She handed it to him without a word. Inside were 2 more slices of jerky and a folded napkin with a worn pack of tissues wrapped inside. I keep little things like this, she said. Never know what's going to break a barrier. Reed nodded his thanks and turned back to Ranger. The dog hadn't shifted, but his eyes tracked every movement, not with fear now, but with something heavier, like he was waiting to see if this would be another false promise. Reed opened the car door, then set his jacket on the back seat, spreading it out carefully. He returned to Ranger's side and crouched low again, letting the silence settle. You remember how we used to train? He murmured. Back of the van. Lights flashing. Sirens in the distance. You'd sit so still you could have passed for stone. Until I said one word. He let the cold wind fill the space between them, then whispered, Home. Ranger didn't move, but his breathing changed deeper now, slower. A soft sound escaped his throat, halfway between a sigh and a whimper. It wasn't the sound of pain. It was something older. Grief. Reed inched closer, then gently laid a hand on the ground. Fingers curled, palm open. Ranger sniffed, barely. His nose hovered above Reed's wrist, then retreated. I won't force you, Reed said. But I'm not leaving you here. Not again. Martha shifted behind them, her boots scraping on gravel. Be careful how you say that, she muttered. Promises don't mean much to someone who's learned they break easy. Reed didn't argue. He reached forward, slowly, and laid the napkin and jerky beside the pump. Then he stood, not abruptly, just enough to ease the pressure off his knees. He looked at Martha. Can you help me lift him? Gently? She blinked at him. You sure? But I think it's now or never. She approached without ceremony, her old joints creaking with each step. Together they knelt on either side of the dog. Ranger stirred but didn't resist. Reed slid one arm under his chest, the other under his haunches. The weight was almost nothing, bones wrapped in exhaustion. As Reed lifted, Ranger gave a low grunt, but didn't fight. His eyes never left Reed's. They settled him into the back seat, on top of the jacket. Reed tucked a spare fleece over his side, gently, then stepped back. Martha stood watching, arms folded. You better do right by him, she said, not accusingly, but like a line drawn in the snow. I've seen men make big speeches to dogs with broken eyes, then give up the second it gets hard. I'm not walking away. You say that now, but healing ain't neat, and it sure ain't quick. So. Reed closed the car door, then turned to face her fully. Thank you for feeding him, for not giving up when no one was looking. Martha shrugged. He's not mine, but he ain't nobody's trash either. She pulled her coat tighter and turned back toward her wagon. Some dogs keep watch long after the world forgets what they were guarding. Reed didn't ask what she meant. He suspected he already knew. The drive back was quiet, just the low hum of the engine, the heater wheezing its tired warmth, and the occasional squeak of windshield wipers brushing away snowflakes. Ranger lay curled in the back seat, his head resting against the door, eyes still open, watching. Reed kept checking the rearview mirror, not because he was worried Ranger would bolt the dog was too weak for that, but because he couldn't believe he was really there, alive, breathing, changed. The city lights flickered ahead, faint and far. Reed glanced once more at the mirror. "Hang on, partner," he whispered. But Ranger had already closed his eyes. And somewhere, in the deep quiet of Reed's chest, something long buried began to stir. Not guilt, not anger, hope. The office lights hummed faintly overhead, casting a pale yellow glow that didn't quite reach the corners. It was after hours now, and the Raven Creek Police Department had folded in on itself, the low murmur of dispatch radios gone quiet. Hallway footsteps faded to memory. Only the soft ticking of a baseboard heater and the distant drip of thawing snow outside punctuated the silence. Reed Callahan stepped into his small office, the door creaking as it closed behind him. He flipped the old radiator switch and crouched beside it, letting the warmth hum to life before turning his attention to the quiet shadow curled on the blanket he'd just laid out. Ranger. The dog hadn't moved much since they'd arrived. He lay on the floor beside the heater, paws tucked close, eyes half-lidded but alert. His ears flicked occasionally, following Reed's motions like sonar. He didn't flinch now, but neither did he trust. Reed knelt beside him, keeping his movements measured. "Let's clean you up, partner." He opened the small first aid kit he kept stashed behind the desk. Most officers used it for paper cuts or minor scrapes. Tonight, it felt woefully inadequate. He dampened a soft cloth with lukewarm water and gently began wiping the dirt from Ranger's fur. The dog didn't protest, though the occasional tremble rippled through his limbs. Reed noticed the way his ribs pressed harsh against skin, how the fur along his spine had thinned into bare patches. Each swipe of the cloth revealed bruises hidden beneath the grime ghost patterns of the past few years etched into muscle. "You've been through hell," Reed murmured, dipping the cloth again. "And nobody came looking." He paused, fingers brushing against something rigid near Ranger's neck. Not bone leather, a collar, faded, nearly black with filth and time. Reed's brow furrowed as he parted the matted fur. The collar had no obvious markings at first glance, but there tucked just beneath the seam hung a narrow, rectangular tag, its edges dulled, the metal corroded by exposure. He unclipped it carefully and brought it beneath the desk lamp. A military-style tag, but smaller than standard issue. The engraving had worn down, as though someone had deliberately scratched over the surface with a file. But with effort and just the right angle, Reed could make out faint numbers. K9 to 72,814. Reed felt a chill despite the heater's warmth. He turned to his desktop, powered on the monitor, and logged into the K9 Federal Registry. The system loaded slowly, as if reluctant to remember. Reed typed in the number with deliberate precision and hit enter. No match found. He frowned, typed it again. K9 to 72,814. Still nothing. He tried truncating the prefix, replaced the dash with a slash. Even searched by fragment 728, 814, 28 to 14. Still nothing. Then he switched databases, state-level K9 assignment logs. Another dead end. He searched regional police retirement records. No entry, no handler history, no reassignment note. It was like the number had never existed. Reed leaned back slowly, eyes still locked on the screen. The heater rattled behind him, trying its best to push back the cold that was now entirely internal. "What the hell did they do to you?" he whispered. Ranger's ears perked faintly, as though he recognized the cadence more than the words. Reed stood and walked over to the file cabinet in the corner, one of the few places still holding physical records. He flipped through years of printed logs, handler pairing charts, deployment histories. He found his own name listed in several 2017 and 2018 briefings, always beside Ranger's ID. 29.21814. But in the master log for 2019, that number was gone. A clean break, like someone had cut out a name from a yearbook. Reed stared down at the drawer. Every instinct in him, honed over a decade of investigative work, screamed the same word. Scrubbed. Ranger let out a low exhale. Not quite a whine. Reed turned to find him watching again, head still down, but eyes alert. The blanket beneath him was damp now from melted snow and body heat, but he didn't seem to mind. "You were erased," Reed said quietly. "They didn't just lose you, they buried you." He crouched again, this time not to clean, just to be near. He let his hand rest beside Ranger's paw without touching. "You saved my life," he said. 3 years ago, in that warehouse fire. You dragged me out while I was bleeding and half blind. I remember every second of that day. I remember the weight of you pulling me. I remember your breathing in my ear, steady like a metronome. That's the only reason I'm still walking." Ranger didn't respond, but his breathing slowed. His eyes didn't blink. "And I never got to say thank you," Reed added. The computer screen dimmed, slipping into standby. The room darkened to shade, leaving only the desk lamp casting warm light across the collar and tag. Reed picked them up again. If someone had tried to erase Ranger's trail, they'd done a damn thorough job. But they'd left just enough, a number, a scar, a piece of metal, someone forgot to destroy. Or maybe they hadn't forgotten. Maybe they didn't expect anyone would care enough to come looking. Reed stood and grabbed his notebook, jotting the number at the top of a clean page. Beneath it, he wrote, K9 to 72,814. Unknown status. Federal Registry. Scrubbed. No retirement record. No reassignment log. No match private transfer? He closed the notebook and looked back down at Ranger, who now lay with his chin on the blanket, eyes half closed. Resting. Not sleeping. Not yet. But for the first time since they'd reunited, he looked less guarded, as though the room, the radiator, the voice, all of it were familiar in a way he couldn't yet explain. Reed sat beside him on the floor and leaned his back against the desk, the collar still warm in his palm. "You're not a ghost," he said softly. "Not while I'm still breathing." And somewhere, under the hum of the heater and the quiet of a snowbound night, something unseen shifted. Not forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of being found. The wind outside had picked up by morning. It howled low through the alley beside the precinct like it was trying to find a way in. Inside Reed's office, the radiator clanked its protest with every gust. Ranger lay curled near the wall, his eyes open now, tracking the light as it shifted across the floor. The blanket beneath him had dried overnight, but the dog hadn't moved much. Just enough to shift his weight, stretch a paw, then retreat again into stillness. Reed stood nearby, hands braced on the desk, staring at the metal tag he'd found the night before. He hadn't slept. Not properly. He drifted for an hour on the lumpy cot down the hall, but his mind kept circling the same loop, that number, those scars, that broken body that used to be the most disciplined canine inch, the Tri-County Division. At 7:04 a.m., he texted her, "Ava, need help. Not official. It's Ranger." And 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then disappeared. Then came back. "I'll be there in 20. She arrived in 17. The sound of her boots on the tile floor pulled Reed's gaze toward the hallway. Ava Sinclair stepped into the room carrying a worn black vet case in one hand and a thermal mug in the other. Her strawberry blonde hair was tied back in a low bun, loose strands falling around her temples. She wore dark scrubs under an old green utility coat still dusted with snow. She looked tired, sharp, focused. "Jesus," she said softly. The second her eyes fell on Ranger, Reed followed her gaze. "Yeah." She set the mug on the desk and knelt without hesitation, her movements practiced and fluid. "Is he sedated?" "Number just like that." Ava crouched beside Ranger, keeping her posture low and unthreatening. "Hey, buddy," she said gently, her voice warmer than Reed remembered hearing in years. "It's okay. I'm just here to take a look." Ranger didn't move, but his ears flicked. "That's more response than I expected," Ava added. She opened her kit, slipped on a pair of nitrile gloves, and leaned closer. Reed watched her work in silence, watched the way her fingers moved with reverence, not pity. He remembered that about her, back in college. She never rushed an animal, never spoke louder than she needed to, never forgot that touch was a language all its own. Ava began her exam at the paws, gently lifting one at a time, checking pads for frostbite. "Slight necrosis on the rear right," she murmured. "Not severe." She moved along the legs, gently palpating joints, testing mobility. Ranger grunted once, but didn't resist. "Muscle atrophy. Probably hasn't walked properly in weeks." She reached his ribs and paused. Her hands pressed lightly along his side. Her expression changed. "What?" Reed asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gently pressed again, slower, now counting under her breath. "Fractured ribs," she said. At least 2 partially healed. Possibly more. Reed's jaw tightened. She shifted her hand to Ranger's flank, where the old shrapnel scar had once been cleaned and pink and stitched like a badge of honor. Now it was barely visible beneath clumped fur and dirt. She traced it lightly. "This one I remember," she said. "That scar from the warehouse op, right?" Reed nodded. "We both took the hit. He kept dragging me even while he was bleeding." Ava moved to the hind legs, lifting one gently, frowning. "These lacerations here," she said. "See how the skin's split in near parallel lines?" Reed crouched beside her. The flesh under Ranger's thigh had scabbed over in uneven rows, like something had cut in over and over. "Barbed wire?" he guessed. "No. Too clean. Too deliberate." She moved up to his torso and lifted tufts of fur with gloved hands, exposing other scars, older ones, faint bruising, and something darker. "Bruises in the same place on both sides," she murmured. "Linear trauma. Blunt object. Repetitive." Ranger twitched beneath her hand. She pulled back immediately, whispering a soft apology. Reed was still, his breath shallow. Ava turned to face him fully now, kneeling. "This wasn't neglect," she said. Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it lowered, like saying it louder might dishonor it. "This was abuse. Controlled. Routine. Someone wanted him broken, Reed. Not just abandoned. Trained. Reconditioned." Reed leaned back, sitting hard against the desk, hands pressed together. "I found his tag. ID number K9 to 72,814. The system says he doesn't exist." Ava took a breath. "Then somebody made damn sure he didn't." "Huh?" The room went quiet again, save for the rattling heater and the low hum of the precinct refrigerator down the hall. "How long does he have?" Reed asked, too quietly. Ava looked at Ranger again. The thinness, the dullness in his coat, the way his eyes didn't close all the way when he blinked. "He's fighting, still eating, still tracking movement. His vitals are weak, but he's not giving up." "That's Ranger," Reed whispered. "That's who he is." Ava stood and stripped off her gloves. "I'll need to bring antibiotics, a proper scanner, fluids. I don't want to move him too much until we stabilize the kidney load." Reed nodded. "Do what you need." She turned back before leaving. "And Reed? Yeah? This isn't just a one-off case. I've seen hints of this before. Rescue dogs, military 9-2nd. They vanish after reassignment. No closure, no records." Reed looked up at her, eyes heavy. "You think it's a pattern?" "I think it's a system," she said. And this dog just pulled the curtain back. The precinct's archive room smelled like old paper, steel, and the kind of fluorescent light that never turned all the way off. It was tucked behind a keypad-locked door in the basement, just past the break room nobody used, and the vending machine that hadn't worked since 2021. Reed Callahan stepped inside alone, the metal door thudding shut behind him with a heavy sigh. He didn't bother turning on the overhead lights. Just clicked on the flashlight app on his phone and let the narrow beam cut through the dust like a scalpel. He moved quickly, not like someone rushing, but like someone who already knew what shelf to check and didn't want to give himself time to think too hard about why he was still shaking. 3 hours had passed since Ava left. 3 hours since she knelt beside Ranger and whispered the words, "This was abuse." Reed had replayed that sentence a dozen times since. Each syllable felt like a bruise forming deeper inside his chest. He approached the far end of the room, the forgotten corner where old K9 unit records had been boxed and stacked like neglected family photo albums. The shelves leaned slightly, as if bowing under the weight of history nobody wanted to revisit. A thin layer of dust coated everything. He ran his hand along the file boxes, looking for the stretch of years that would have held Ranger's final assignment, 2019. Maybe early 2020. He found it a box marked in black Sharpie. K9, Retirement's Vertical Bar, 2017-2020. Reed pulled the box down, coughing once at the dust cloud it stirred. He set it on the metal table, flipped the lid open, and began sorting through the folders. There they were. K9 to 72,598, retired to Handler Home. K9 to 72,601, euthanized after injury in service. K9 to 72,644, reassigned to border station. K9 to 72,703, adopted through federal vet program. Line after line he flipped until he found one. K9 to 72,814 Monroe R. His fingers paused. He recognized his own handwriting scrawled along the deployment summary line. It hit him harder than expected. He hadn't written that name in over 3 years, but something was wrong. The folder was thin, too thin. He opened it, expecting discharge papers, a reassignment memo, medical history, behavior reports. But all it held was a single yellow slip. A sticky note, written in thick red marker. Transferred IRL. That was it. No dates, no signatures, no exit stamp. Just 2 words and an abbreviation. Reed stared at the note. IRL, he murmured aloud. What the hell is that? He pulled his phone and typed the acronym into a search bar. Dozens of hits came up for random institutions, Ireland Real Estate Limited, Interactive Remote Learning, Internal Revenue Ledgers. Nothing that made sense. Nothing related to K9 transfer programs or federal security units. Then he typed IRL plus K, 9 plus government, and the third hit down hit like a hammer. Iron Reach Logistics, formerly registered as a private defense contractor specializing in asset protection, K9 tactical deployment, and secure perimeter security. Inactive license. Status. Dissolved. Reed sat down slowly. Iron Reach Logistics. He'd heard the name once. Years ago. In a hallway conversation between 2 captains discussing private contracts and offloading the dogs no one wanted to file paperwork for. At the time, he'd thought it was rumored departmental cynicism, the way cops sometimes joke to avoid grief. But now he was holding a red ink note like it was a tombstone. He flipped the sticky over. Nothing on the back. No initials. No department stamp. It wasn't just incomplete, it was hidden. Erased. He looked up as the hum of the heating system kicked on overhead. The air down here was cold. But suddenly, Reed felt sweat bead at the back of his neck. He grabbed his notebook and wrote, K9 to 72,814. Status. Missing from system. All logs prior to 2019 intact. Final record equals transferred IRL. IRL equals Iron Reach Logistics. Dissolved. No chain of custody. No handler assigned post-transfer. No medical trail post-discharge. Ava suspects structured abuse. Likely. Unauthorized Knuvi reassignment. He stared at the last line, then underlined it 3 times. The realization settled like cold iron in his stomach. They hadn't lost Ranger. They hadn't even neglected him. They'd handed him off. Quietly, willfully. To a company that no longer existed if it had ever officially existed at all. He put the folder back in the box, but not before slipping the red sticky note into his coat pocket. He didn't want to leave it behind. He returned upstairs and found the hallway dark. The precinct was nearly empty. A few overnight staff remained in dispatch, and the janitor's cart was parked halfway down the corridor. Reed stepped into his office and closed the door quietly behind him. Ranger hadn't moved much. His head was resting near the heater, his breathing slow but steady. His eyes opened as Reed entered, not startled, just aware. Reed sank into his chair. He didn't speak right away, just looked at the dog, the radiator humming, the snow starting again outside the narrow window. After a while, he said softly, I found a name. Ranger blinked once. Iron Reach Logistics. He let the words settle into the room. They didn't lose you. They gave you away. And then someone made sure you couldn't be found. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice tightening. But they didn't count on this. On you surviving. On someone remembering your name. The room fell still again. Then his phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Ava. Still thinking about his scars. You were right to dig. Dogs like Ranger don't go missing. They get erased. Reed stared at the screen, then at Ranger, and quietly, to no one but the dog, he whispered, Not anymore. The snow hadn't stopped. By the time Reed returned home with Ranger bundled in the back seat under his old fleece, the world outside was a blanket of white streetlights blurred into halos, tree branches bent low under weight. The town muffled as if someone had pressed their finger gently to its pulse. Inside the house, the quiet was heavier. Reed carried Ranger in his arms, not because the dog couldn't walk, but because every step seemed to rattle something inside him, and Reed couldn't bear to hear it. His coat, damp with melted snow, clung to his back. Ranger's fur was still matted in places, but his breathing was slow, steady, and trusting enough to let himself be held. It felt unnatural, not because of the weight, but because Reed had never carried him like this before. Back when Ranger was in his prime, it had been the other way around. Reed eased him down beside the living room radiator, which clinked softly as warm air began to rise from the vents. He laid a thick blanket underneath, gently lowering the shepherd into its folds. Ranger made no sound. He just curled tightly, like a question mark. Reed took a seat on the nearby couch, not turning on the television, not reaching for his phone, just listening to the subtle clicks of heating metal, the occasional shifting of the dog's limbs. Outside, snow tapped softly at the window pane. Then, with care, Reed reached for a worn cardboard file box he'd kept tucked behind the sofa since last spring. Inside, case files from before the Black Ridge explosion. Reports, notes, maps, Ranger's old duty cards, the kind they used during joint K-9 exercises. Most of it was administrative clutter, but some of it had weight. He opened one, adjusted the lamp, and began to read aloud. June 14, 2018. Suspected weapons traffic route moving through Grant's Quarry. Recon assigned to K-9 to 72,814 and Officer Callahan. Mission window 0400 hours to 0700. Estimated visibility 30 yards. He glanced at Ranger. The dog hadn't moved. He continued. Command code issued at 0412. Recon 1 engage perimeter pattern. Handler instructed verbal and hand signal at... Ranger's ear twitched. Reed posed, waited. The ear twitched again sharper this time, as if some part of the sound had pierced a place language hadn't touched in years. Reed kept his voice level, steady. Repeat command, engage. Response noted. K-9 proceeded to Quadrant 2, pause, point scan, and scent alert. Response, affirmative. Ranger's breathing shifted. It wasn't louder, but it was different, shorter inhales, followed by longer, trembling exhales. Not quite panic, more like remembrance. You remember that one, huh? Reed murmured. He reached for another file, a slimmer one, labeled in red marker, Ridgecrest Compound. He opened it and read, the 3rd of October, Operation Lowlight, night breach. Suspect held inside northeast structure. Verbal sequence at 0344. Command, clear left, run. Ranger's whole body jolted. Not violently, but it was unmistakable. A reflex, like muscle memory clawing up from underneath scar tissue. He didn't move from his spot, but his legs shifted under him, a twitch in the back haunches, a tightening of the front paws, like he was preparing to sprint even though there was nowhere to go. Reed's voice softened. I used to say that word, and you were gone like lightning, he whispered. Straight into the dark. No hesitation. Ranger let out a sound then, not a bark, not a growl, just a low, breathy noise, the kind that broke at the edges, a memory trying to breathe. Reed closed the file. Saturday back against the couch, staring into the middle distance. He remembered those nights, the way Ranger moved like wind, the way he only looked back once the job was done, as if needing to confirm Reed was still there, still breathing, still whole. Everything went sideways after that warehouse fire, Reed said. Not really to the dog. You dragged me out, I blacked out. And when I woke up, they said you'd been transferred. He laughed once. It sounded like a crack in a wall. They said you were doing just fine. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed, tires crunching snow. Then silence again. Reed leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I should have fought harder. I should have pushed. But I thought maybe they were right. That you were with another handler, another unit, safe, still working, still being seen. He looked at Ranger, whose eyes remained open, barely staring at nothing, but there was no tension now, no tremble in the pause, just the slow pull of breath and the rise and fall of memory. I was wrong, Reed said, and I won't be again. He reached over, gently resting a hand near Ranger's front leg, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth. The dog didn't flinch. Not this time. Reed sat like that for a long while, hand beside paw, man beside memory, as the snow continued falling, soft and patient, like the world itself had decided to wait with them. The morning light was pale, almost apologetic. It filtered through the frost-laced windows of Reed Callahan's kitchen like it didn't want to disturb anything. Outside, the snowfall had slowed to flurries, and the world beyond the porch looked like it had been wrapped in cotton. Still, quiet. A fresh start on the surface. Inside, the kettle hissed low on the stove. The floor creaked faintly under Reed's weight as he padded barefoot to the window, mug in hand, watching the winter morning unfold with the practiced stillness of a man used to reading silence. Behind him, near the radiator, Ranger lay on a folded blanket. He hadn't moved much overnight, but his breathing was calmer now, less guarded. His ears perked once when Reed stirred the sugar into his coffee, then flattened again, not out of fear, but because rest was finally heavier than vigilance. Reed stood there for a while, watching snow slip from the railing. He opened the back door slowly, letting in a crisp burst of air. The world outside smelled of pine and chimney smoke and the faint ghost of gasoline from some snowplow miles away. He stepped onto the porch, letting the door stay cracked behind him, just in case. And that's when it happened. From somewhere out on Main Street, a few blocks down, maybe closer, came a short, sharp blast of a car horn. Not long, not aggressive, just 2 notes, quick, crisp, almost like a signal. In a fraction of a second, everything changed. Inside the house, a scrape, then a clatter of claws on wood, then a growl deep, raw, and shaking with something primal. Reed spun. He didn't even have to think. "Ranger!" But the dog was already gone from his spot. He'd bolted not toward the door, not toward safety, but sideways, into the hallway, claws skidding across hardwood as he ducked under the old pine table near the coat rack. By the time Reed stepped back inside, all he could see were shaking limbs wedged between chair legs, and Ranger's eyes wide, unblinking, fixed on nothing and everything. His teeth were bared in a silent snarl, but no sound came, only breath. Quick, panicked. "Hey," Reed said gently, crouching. No movement. "Ranger, it's okay. There's no one here." The dog's chest heaved like he was running full speed, though every inch of him was locked in place. His tail was tucked tight beneath him, his body curved in a painful-looking arc beneath the table's low lip. Reed moved slower now, voice down to a whisper. "That sound," he said. "The horn?" He didn't need an answer. He already knew. This wasn't fear. This was memory. Ranger wasn't in the house anymore. He wasn't under a pine table in a quiet kitchen. He was somewhere else, wherever that horn belonged. A place where signals meant something cruel, where warnings came sharp and fast, where staying still could get you hurt, and moving too slow could get you worse. Reed sank to the floor and sat cross-legged just outside the table's edge. He didn't try to coax Ranger out. Not yet. Instead, he let his voice settle into the space between them. "I didn't know it would happen like that," he murmured. "I should have known noise like that might bring it all back." The dog's breathing didn't slow, but his ears twitched once at the sound of Reed's voice. Reed stayed there, coffee cooling beside him on the floor, knees beginning to ache, but he didn't move. He just kept talking. "You remember what it meant, don't you?" he said. "That sound, 2 blasts, like a cue." Ranger didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Reed's throat tightened. "I've heard rumors," he said, "back-channel stuff, about how some of the off-the-book training camps use horn patterns instead of voice command, like breaking a dog down into pieces, so they only react to triggers, nothing else." He paused. "Not names, not handlers, just sounds." Silence again. Then, very slowly, Ranger's jaw unclenched. His body didn't move, but the growl faded. It was replaced by something else, not peace, but exhaustion. The kind that settles in after a storm, once the wind stripped everything down. Reed reached forward, hand flat, resting it on the edge of the table's wooden frame. "You're not there anymore," he said. "You're home." It wasn't a magic word. Nothing changed in that moment. But something shifted, the kind of shift you could only sense in the breath between things. Ranger didn't crawl out, but he closed his mouth, and for the first time since the horn sounded, His eyes blinked. Reed stayed for a long while, not saying anything more, just breathing, just letting the quiet reclaim its place. Eventually, when he stood, his legs cracked with stiffness. He left the door slightly ajar and returned to the kitchen, heated a new kettle, took a fleece blanket from the closet and laid it near the table's edge, within reach if Ranger wanted it. He didn't try to move the dog, didn't pull, didn't push. A few minutes later, he heard a shift behind him. Claws, wood, the faintest grunt. Ranger emerged, not fully just enough to lie beside the table now, not under it. Still low to the ground, still cautious, but closer to the warmth. Closer to him. Reed didn't say a word, just placed the mug on the counter and leaned against the doorframe, watching the dog curl once. Tighter this time, tail twitching faintly. Outside, the snow had stopped. But inside, something else had just begun to thaw. Willowbrook Park still carried the hush of winter. Reed parked near the edge of the lot, where tire tracks from last night had frozen into shallow ridges. His breath fogged the windshield before he killed the engine, and for a moment he just sat hands on the wheel, eyes scanning the playground that sat beyond the row of pine trees like an afterthought. This had been Ranger's old haunt, Reed remembered. Before the explosion, before the deployment that wasn't called a deployment, before the word transfer erased everything that mattered. The leash hung loosely from his hand. Not that it mattered Ranger hadn't let it be clipped yet. Still didn't trust the sound. For now, he lay curled in the passenger seat, head resting against the console, his eyes open but distant. He didn't flinch anymore. But that wasn't trust. That was fatigue. Reed opened the door. Crunch, snow beneath boots. Ice, layered like skin over the path that led toward the clearing where kids used to play and where, years ago, one lean K9 used to chase wind like it meant something. He didn't tug Ranger out. He just stood beside the car, letting the door stay open, waiting. The dog shifted. Then, without command, stepped down. His legs were still weak. One paw landed awkwardly in a drift, but he didn't cry out, just limped beside Reed as they walked toward the bend in the trail. The wind passed soft through the bare trees, making the branches clack like bones. They reached the small grove where the grass would have grown in summer, where Ranger had barked at ducks, at clouds, at nothing in particular. Now, it was just space. Reed crouched and picked up a broken stick, turning it over in his palm. He didn't throw it. Didn't want to. Ranger stood beside him, ears tilted, and then Reed said it for the first time since that night. "Ranger," he whispered. "Heel." The dog didn't move, but he looked at him. Fully. And for the first time in days, something like recognition flickered. A silent click in the quiet between them. Reed knelt slowly, letting the stick fall. "You remember that name, don't you?" he asked. Not the badge number, not the call sign, just that. A car engine rumbled. Distant. Reed glanced up. Parked on the far side of the lot, half shielded by the tree line, was an SUV. Dark, too clean, tinted windows, no license plates. The kind of SUV that doesn't wait. It watches. Reed stood slowly, placing a steadying hand on Ranger's shoulder. The dog had gone still, his body tense in a way that wasn't panic, not anymore. This was alertness, pattern recognition. The SUV didn't move. A single puff of smoke drifted out through a cracked driver's side window. A man sat inside, jacket gray, face just shadows behind the glass. He didn't reach for a phone, didn't start the engine, just watched. Watched the exact spot where they stood. Watched Ranger. Reed narrowed his eyes. He reached casually into his coat, pulled out his own phone, and lifted it as if checking a message but angled the camera. Snapped one frame, then another. Click, click. The SUV's brake lights blinked once. Then the engine turned over, smooth as a whisper. The vehicle reversed slowly, like it had nothing to hide, like it hadn't just been memorizing something important and eased out of the lot, tires humming against the cold asphalt. Reed didn't move. He watched the SUV vanish down the tree-lined exit. Only when the sound had fully faded did he crouch beside Ranger again. You saw him too, didn't you? The dog gave no response. But his tail curled tighter. The muscles in his haunches still coiled. Reed sighed. "You weren't just dumped," he murmured. "You were followed." The implications sank in slowly, like meltwater through old stone. Someone had been tracking the spot, not looking for the dog but watching who found him, waiting for what came next. Reed looked down at the dog beside him. "They think I don't remember," he said. "But I do. I remember the scars. I remember the explosion. And I remember the sound you made when you covered me." His voice dropped to a hush. "I owe you everything. Oh." The leash hung between his fingers like a bridge neither of them had dared cross. He held it out. No command this time, just an offering. Ranger didn't move for a long time. Then, slow as falling dusk, he stepped forward, not fully into the loop, but close enough that the metal clip brushed his chest. A whisper, not obedience, but something like trust. Reed didn't force it. He just nodded. "Let's go home." As they walked back toward the car, snow beginning to fall again, Reed glanced over his shoulder once more at the space where the SUV had idled. He didn't know the man's name yet, but he had a face, a timestamp, a question that wouldn't go away, and a dog who remembered everything, even the names no one dared to say aloud anymore. The precinct's basement always smelled of old toner, drying glue, and the slow rot of forgotten things. Reed descended the creaking stairwell with the same weariness he once reserved for morgue duty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering as though protesting his arrival. Down here, even silence had weight, a low hum of history too stale to breathe freely. He moved past rows of rusting filing cabinets, their drawers labeled in smeared Sharpie. "Case closed, prior to 2020. Canine retention files. Evidence chain, inactive." Dust clung to every surface like cobwebs made of time. This part of the precinct hadn't seen a full audit in years, and nobody came down unless something was broken, buried, or both. Reed turned the corner, found the beige metal cabinet marked K9 Logs, 2015, 2020, and yanked the drawer open. It groaned like a wound splitting open. The folders were upright, some bending with age. His fingers traced the years until they hit 2019. He pulled the stack forward, letting the folder edges fan out like brittle pages of a prayer book. There it was, a manila file. His handwriting across the top in dark blue ink, slightly smudged K9 to 47R, deployment follow-up R. Monroe. He froze. He hadn't written that name in 3 years, hadn't said it since the incident. But there it was, sharp, angled letters written in a rush. The way you write when adrenaline hasn't worn off, but you're expected to process and move on. He opened the file slowly. Inside, 2 pages, 1 torn corner, a faded incident report clipped with a dull paperclip, and a sticky note, a yellow square curling at the corners. His own handwriting again, but not a note to himself. A forwarding instruction. Transferred. Iron Reach. That was it. No handler signature. No discharge date. No K9 debriefing. Just transferred. Reed's fingers tightened around the folder. Iron Reach. He whispered it aloud, the words tasting metallic in his mouth. No department bore that name. No official branch. It wasn't military. It wasn't state. It was something else, something that sounded like it belonged to logistics, trucks, and non-disclosure agreements. He flipped the sticky note over. Blank. His eyes narrowed. That day, the day he wrote the report, was chaos. He remembered smoke, sirens, the sound of boots on asphalt. He remembered bleeding through his uniform and the pressure of a warm body pinning him down, saving him. Ranger. But this transfer? He never authorized it. Never saw it happen. He checked the report again, and there it was, at the bottom corner. Filed by proxy. Sergeant H. Laramie. Reed's jaw clenched. Laramie. He'd retired 6 months later and moved to Nevada. Had barely looked him in the eye on his last day. The memory tilted sideways, the pieces no longer fitting. Why would Laramie file it under Reed's name? Why would a K9 be transferred without handler review? And why Iron Reach? His breath slowed. The paper in his hand felt heavier now, more dangerous. Reed slid the file into his messenger bag and zipped it tight. He wasn't taking chances, not anymore. Whoever had been watching at Willowbrook Park wasn't just there to observe. They were there because someone knew Reed had started digging. And that meant the clock had started ticking. He backed away from the drawer, letting it slide closed with a reluctant clunk. As he turned to leave, his boot crunched over something soft. He looked down. Another sticky note. It must have fallen loose from one of the folders, or maybe it hadn't. 2 words scribbled in a fast, unfamiliar hand. Don't ask. The ink was darker, fresher. His heart thudded once, hard. He scanned the rows behind him, empty. Only the sound of the light above him flickering like it knew something it wasn't allowed to say. Reed stepped backward slowly, then took the stairs 2 at a time. Ranger's file clutched tight against his ribs. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Whatever Iron Reach was, it hadn't finished with Ranger. And now, it was coming for him too. The clock over Ava Sinclair's sink ticked in low, deliberate beats, too loud for the room, too soft to ignore. Outside, the snow had thinned into a fine, metallic mist, brushing against the clinic's frosted window panes like ash. Reed stood by the counter, arms folded, his jacket still damp from the archive basement. The folder lay unopened on her dining table, the kind of folder that could end careers or start wars, depending on who read it. Ava set down her mug. The chamomile had gone cold. "You said Iron Reach?" she asked softly, like the name alone might tilt the air. Reed nodded, his voice low. "Does it mean anything to you?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at the steam ghosting the glass, her breath slowing. Then, 3 years ago, February, I got a call. He waited. "It wasn't from any unit I knew," she continued. The voice on the other end clipped. Corporate, not military. Said they needed a licensed trauma vet. No questions asked. No official paperwork. Just cash and confidentiality. Reed's brows furrowed. "And you agreed?" Ava looked at him, not defensive, not ashamed, just tired. "I was broke, still paying off my father's debt. My clinic was 4 months behind on rent. I said yes. She sat down, hands resting on the tabletop like she was bracing herself for waves. "They drove me in a van with no plates, windows blacked out. I wasn't allowed to bring my phone. They made me wear earmuffs the whole way, like I was livestock." Reed's stomach turned. "Where did they take you?" "A warehouse," she whispered. "Somewhere near the old rail yard. I could smell oil and wet metal. There were no signs, no lights. Just a concrete box surrounded by men with no insignias. Reed pulled the chair across from her and sat. "What did they want you to do?" Her throat worked before she answered. "They brought out dogs, 7 of them, all Belgian Malinois or Shepherds, lined them up like equipment." She exhaled. "They were sedated, but one wasn't going down easy." Her fingers moved unconsciously to her temple, tracing the memory. "He had this scar," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. "Right here above his left eye. Long, like something had torn into him, but healed wrong." Reed's breath stilled. "Ranger." Ava nodded slowly, as if reading his thoughts. "I remember kneeling in front of him. He was fighting the sedative, legs trembling, but he wasn't growling, just staring, like he knew what was happening, like he was begging me not to do it." She blinked quickly, eyes glassing. "I told them he needed another dose. They said, 'Do it or we will.' So I did." Silence. Reed's jaw tightened. "Did they say where the dogs were going?" "Number." Her voice was almost inaudible now. "Only that they were being decommissioned for redistribution. That's the phrase they used. I remember it exactly. Like cargo. Like furniture." She stood and went to the window, her back to him. "I didn't sleep for days after, and I never told anyone, because I knew it wouldn't change anything. And part of me," her voice broke, "part of me didn't want to admit I went along with it." Reed rose, slow and steady. "You didn't know what you were part of." "No," she said quietly. "But I didn't ask either. That's the part that eats at me." They stood there for a moment, 2 people bruised by different kinds of guilt, held together now by one dog neither had been able to save when it mattered most. Reed looked toward the hallway, where Ranger lay curled under a blanket, his chest rising slow, ears twitching in a dream. "What if he remembers you?" Reed asked. Ava's fingers curled against the windowsill. "Then I'll be the voice he forgives, or the one he never comes near again." Reed stepped closer, voice low and sure. "He didn't turn away from me at that gas station. Even after all he'd been through. You saved him from more than they wanted. Ava shook her head, but something in her eyes flickered, not absolution, but the faintest thread of possibility. Outside, a pair of headlights passed the clinic window, then faded into the snowy dark. Neither of them moved. Somewhere behind them, Ranger stirred. And for the first time, he let out a sound, not a growl, not a whimper, just a low, fractured chuff. Like breath, returning to a place where breath had once been taken. The sun was just a haze behind the clouds as Reed parked across from the diner again. This time without hunger, without distraction, only silence. His unmarked Crown Vic sat idle under the flickering streetlight, wipers ticking every few seconds, though the windshield stayed mostly dry. The cold outside had sharpened since yesterday. Inside the vehicle, it smelled faintly of dog fur and old coffee. Ranger was home, curled in a blanket nest Ava had stitched together from old clinic towels. Reed had left him there. The front door double-locked, but even so, his eyes kept drifting to the rearview mirror like he expected someone to follow him home. At 6:17 p.m., the SUV pulled in. Same make, same matte black body, same tinted windows reflective enough to blur outlines, but not enough to make you forget someone was watching. The engine didn't cut off. Reed shifted forward slightly, adjusting the mirror to track the driver's side. Then, slowly, the door opened. A man stepped out tall, dressed in a gray field jacket zipped all the way to the throat. His hat brim dipped low, chin shadowed, black gloves, black boots, clean, intentional. Not military, but not civilian either. Reed didn't recognize the face, mostly because there wasn't one. Not really. There was a face, technically pale, angular, slightly weathered, but it was the kind of face that evaporated from memory the second you blinked. Nothing to catch on, nothing to describe, just blank. And yet, his posture radiated presence, purpose. The man didn't go inside the diner. He didn't glance at the posted menu, didn't pull a phone from his pocket, didn't pretend to be waiting for someone. Instead, he stood by the passenger side, hands in coat pockets, staring across the street at Willowbrook Park. Not scanning, not distracted, staring, direct, unblinking. The kind of gaze not born of curiosity, but familiarity. Reed watched him from behind the safety of the fogged window, breath shallow. His fingers tapped the wheel, once, twice. He recognized that kind of stillness. It was the kind soldiers wore when they were watching something they'd once owned, or hunted. Reed's fingers hovered near his phone, tempted to snap a photo, but something inside warned him, don't. Not yet. The man lit a cigarette with practiced calm, then flicked the match without looking. The flame vanished before it touched the asphalt. He smoked without moving. The tip glowed once, twice. Then, without a glance behind, he climbed back into the SUV and pulled out slow, deliberate, like someone leaving the scene of a successful surveillance. Reed started his engine. He didn't follow immediately. Not directly. He waited 3 beats, then turned his headlights off and rolled onto the street, staying 2 car lengths behind. The SUV didn't speed, didn't make sharp turns. It slid through the side streets of town like it knew every curve. Past shuttered shops, down an alley Reed remembered from a bust in 2018, across the train tracks with the rusted gates. Then it happened. The vehicle turned left, down a dirt road Reed hadn't driven in years toward the old lumberyard. Reed followed until the brush thickened and the last street lamp disappeared behind him. Then he stopped. Ahead, the SUV slowed and slipped behind a corrugated steel gate one Reed remembered had been padlocked for years. But tonight, it creaked open like it had been waiting. Reed killed the engine. In the silence that followed, the cold pressed in like breath on the back of his neck. He didn't move, didn't reach for the glove box, didn't radio it in, because every part of his instinct screamed, "You're not supposed to be here." The gate clanged shut behind the SUV with a sound that echoed far too long for a space that was supposedly abandoned. And just like that, the vehicle disappeared. No guards, no lights, just dark. Reed exhaled slowly, fingers tightening on the wheel. He didn't know what was in there, but he knew who was watching. And that man, the one with no face, hadn't been looking at the park by accident. He'd been looking at the exact bench where Ranger had crawled from beneath the pump. Reed stood still for a long moment, letting the silence seep into his bones. The cracked asphalt of the industrial yard groaned beneath his boots as fog swirled low, blanketing the forgotten ruins of Warehouse 14. It was 2:03 a.m. The world felt paused as if something had been waiting. He stepped inside. The smell hit first. Oil, mildew, antiseptic. Not just decay memory, the kind that clings. Reed's flashlight swept over collapsed shelving, cages mangled beyond repair, and bowls crusted with dried kibble. A collapsed steel pen in the corner caught his eye. Chains bolted to the walls. This wasn't a storage unit, it was a cell. His breath caught. He moved toward a warped desk, half buried under a tarp. Underneath, a cracked filing box, shipping manifests. Tags labeled asset, retired, conditioned, transferred. Handler names he didn't recognize. And there stamped in faded red. K9 to 72,814. Ranger. His hands trembled as he unfolded a photograph. Surveillance style. Dogs in cages. Men in black jackets, faces blurred. And Ranger, standing proud, sharp-eyed, beside a man with gray gloves. On the back, "The job's not finished yet." Reed's pulse pounded. This wasn't just abandonment. It was systemized, coordinated, covered. A faint sound broke the silence, metal scraping. Not human. Small. Wounded. Reed moved through the maze of iron cages. Each bore signs of desperation. Claw marks in concrete, shattered chains, bowls with bite scars from starvation. One cage door hung loose padlock cut clean. Another had deep scratches carved into the base 4 claw marks, ending abruptly, as if a dog had tried to signal something. Plead, resist, survive. Further in, behind a heap of broken crates, he found a rusted cage barely upright. Inside, a small figure, curled and shivering. A dog, barely conscious. Not Ranger, but one of them. One they left behind. The flashlight beam trembled in his grip. He reached the far end of the warehouse. Another desk. Another tarp. Beneath it, a stack of clipboards, each labeled with K9 tag IDs. No names, only codes, statuses, destinations. One after another. Retired. Conditioned. Transferred. This wasn't paperwork. It was inventory. Underneath, an accordion folder sealed with brittle rubber bands. Inside, a manifest with a handwritten note. Move OR 19 before audit. Beside it, a phone number, partially smeared by an oily thumbprint. Then a creak metal shifting above. Reed clicked off the flashlight. Waited. Nothing. He crouched again and swept the light under the desk. A smaller box sat hidden. Inside, plastic specimen bags, each holding a silicone strip microchips, sliced open, their circuitry gutted, their IDs erased. Alongside them, a brass stamp etched crudely. IRL. Iron Reach Logistics. Reed's breath tightened. This wasn't just rehoming. These were animals stripped of identity, loyalty, memory then repackaged and sold. Ranger had been spared only because he escaped. He took photos of everything. The cages, the chains, the manifests, the defaced chips. But the weight of what he found couldn't be captured by his phone. This place was a tomb, a graveyard for loyalty. And they almost got away with it, until one dog came back. A faint clang rippled from the entrance he'd used. Reed snapped off the phone's shutter sound and killed the flashlight again. Darkness swallowed him whole, but his senses sharpened. Footsteps? Maybe wind. Maybe not. He counted to 30. Silence flowed back in, thick as tar. Switching on the light once more, he zipped the chip box into his satchel and backed toward the side corridor. He paused at the threshold for one last look at the rows of cages. In the beam's fringe, he noticed a single word scratched into a metal plate near the floor. Letters jagged, uneven, carved by desperation rather than planning. 4 letters. Home. Reed's throat tightened. He brushed the carved metal with his fingertips, a silent vow slipping through him like current. I'm taking you home. All of you. Then he killed the light and slipped back into the fog, every step echoing with chains he refused to leave unbroken. Reed's pulse was still drumming in his ears when he reached a windowless anteroom at the rear of the loading bay. Someone had once tried to make the space an office. A dented file cabinet leaned drunkenly against a water-stained drywall patch, and a desk lamp, no bulb, sat toppled on a metal table. On that table lay a mildewed banker's box sealed with duct tape, yellowed by time. A single word was scrawled across the lid in grease pencil. Archive. Reed sliced the tape with the blade of his multi-tool and lifted the lid. The smell hit first old paper tinged with chemical preservative. Inside were dozens of manila envelopes, each thick with photographs. Some were marked by month, the 21st of March, the 20th of July, others by code, IR-17B, IR-18C. No names, no explanations. He slipped on nitrile gloves and drew out the top envelope. Black and white print spilled across the table, grainy shots of kennels, loading docks, and vans whose license plates had been drilled blank. Every dog's eyes in those photos shone like coins caught in flashlight beams, wide, startled, waiting. He kept digging. Halfway through the stack, he froze. A color photograph, larger than the rest. Glossy, edges sharp. The lighting was clinical fluorescent, no shadows to soften the details. In the center stood a German shepherd, coat brushed, muscles heavier than Reed remembered, posture rigid, gaze locked forward like a soldier at inspection. Ranger. No grime, no rib showing, no tremor in the limbs. He looked stronger, fiercer, yet something in the eyes felt wrong, tense, guarded, like a door had been slammed shut behind them. Beside Ranger stood a man, gray field jacket, black gloves, face angled just enough that the brim of a ball cap hid his features. But Reed didn't need the eyes to know him. SUV driver. The man with no face. The composition stabbed at Reed, an owner displaying property, pride without mercy. He turned the photo over. Red ink bled through thick paper fibers in jagged strokes. The job's not finished yet. Every word leaned forward. Letters gouged deep as if whoever wrote them despised the paper for daring to exist. A chill slithered up Reed's spine. Not a threat, an intent. A promise waiting for completion. He scanned the box again and found a matching envelope labeled IR-19 Visual Files. Inside, sequential shots of dogs in progressive stages, mangy on arrival, bulked and bright-eyed weeks later, then photographed beside masked handlers. It was a macabre before and after reel. Break them, rebuild them, sell them. At the bottom of the envelope, a single Polaroid tucked behind a shipping slip showed a row of dogs in a transport cage. The timestamp read only month and year, the 22nd of October. Ranger stood at one end, muzzle strapped tight, tail tucked, yet eyes brimming with the same rebellious fire Reed had seen when a suspect once tried to corner them in an alley. The fire Iron Reach hadn't managed to extinguish. He slid the Polaroid into his inner coat pocket, then returned to the glossy print with the red warning. For a moment, he couldn't move. Rage and sorrow knotted in his throat until breathing felt like swallowing glass. A low clang echoed from somewhere in the bay metal, striking metal, distant but real. Reed killed his flashlight out of instinct, plunging the room into black. He held the photo flat against his chest and listened. Silence. Then another sound closer this time. A door hinge whining under slow pressure. Someone else was in warehouse 14. Reed crouched behind the desk, drawing his service pistol but keeping it low. The darkness pressed against his eyes so hard he felt spots bloom. He steadied his breath the way he'd been trained. Inhale, 4 counts, hold 2, exhale 6. Footsteps. 1, 2. Pause. Rubber soles, careful on broken concrete. He peeked around the desk. Faint light bled in from the bay, moonlight diffused by fog through shattered skylights. A figure crossed the threshold, tall, lean, wearing a headlamp switched off, gloved hands holding a crowbar. The stranger swept the beam of a small flashlight across the cages, as if confirming emptiness, then toward the office door. Reed ducked back. Paper rattled in the box as his arm brushed it. He winced too loud. The footsteps stopped. A beat. Then resumed faster now, aimed straight for the anteroom. Reed's grip tightened on the pistol. He wasn't here for a firefight, but he wouldn't be taken, either. The figure stepped into the doorway, flashlight beam slicing across the table. It halted on the open box of photos. A sharp intake of breath. "Damn," a voice muttered low. Male, surprised. Not the SUV driver. Too young. But connected, if he was back here in the middle of the night. Reed rose. Weapon level. Flashlight snapping on and blinding the intruder in one motion. "Police! Hands up!" The man froze, crowbar clanging to the floor. He raised both arms, palms open. The flashlight revealed a clean-shaven face, eyes wide behind fogged safety glasses. "I'm just paid to scrap metal," he stammered. Reed advanced, keeping distance. At 2 a.m.? In a building under federal investigation? The scrapper's gaze flicked to the photos. Recognition. Fear. He knew more than he'd admit. Reed kicked the crowbar away. "Name? Elliot. Elliot Page. Who hired you, Elliot?" I don't know a name, just cash. Said clear the cages, torch the files, anything with a dog on it. When? Tonight. Said after midnight, no cops around. Torch the files. Erase the proof. Reed's jaw locked. He motioned with the pistol. "Turn around, hands on the wall." As Elliot complied, Reed glanced at the photo still clutched in his left hand, the one of Ranger and the faceless handler. The red ink seemed to glow in the flashlight's spill, words pulsing with threat. The job's not finished yet. Not if he had anything to say about it. He cuffed Elliot with zip ties and dialed dispatch for pickup eyes, never leaving the dim bay beyond, where rusted cages sat like open mouths in the dark, waiting for a promise of justice. Warehouse 14 was silent again. Fog licked at the walls as Reed stepped back inside. The echo of Elliot Page's arrest still hanging in the air like smoke from a gun, not yet cooled. Reed's flashlight swept over rust and scorched dust. Elliot was cuffed. They had photos, ledgers, but Reed knew what mattered. Wouldn't be on paper. It would be hidden, and it would be hard to erase. He returned to the far corner where crates had once held more than tools. A single box was out of place just enough. Beneath it, concrete chipped in a way that didn't match the rest of the floor. Reed knelt, pried open a plywood panel painted to blend with the room, and pulled free a metal lockbox sealed by 2 plain latches. Inside, asterisk, a portable hard drive, laser-etched with the word Sierra, asterisk, a thumb drive labeled Init key. He didn't hesitate. He slipped both into his satchel and left before the night had time to change its mind. Reed's dining table had become a battlefield. Open files, cold coffee, and evidence in disarray. Ava sat at the other end, cross-referencing handler notes, while Ranger, his loyal German shepherd, lay curled nearby, still listening. "What now?" she asked. Reed inserted the thumb drive into an old ThinkPad. No Wi-Fi, no network, just the sound of old code waking up. A single program appeared, SierraGate.exe. He clicked. When the Sierra drive followed, lines of code unfurled, folders loaded, profiles active, profiles retired, invoices, handler notes, video logs. He opened profiles, retired. 32 folders, each tagged with 6-character K9 IDs. He clicked. Dossier filled the screen. Malinois, Dutch Shepherds, German Shepherds sold, exported, reassigned. No follow-ups, no accountability. Just transfer destinations and bank codes. "They're exporting them like surplus," Ava whispered. "No welfare, just warehousing." Then Reed saw it. K9 to 72,814. He clicked. Ranger's profile opened. At the top, in red, reconditioning required. Potential risk notes followed. Asterisk. Reacts violently to horn cue. Asterisk. Refuses food from non-primary handlers. Asterisk. Attempts to return to last known handler. Multiple escape attempts. Asterisk. Recommendation. Full amygdala dampening protocol. His projected buyer? Redline International Logistics. Price? $800. Less than a rifle. Less than a month's rent. Ava sat back in stunned silence. "They tried to erase him," she said. "No," Reed growled. "They tried to sell him without erasing what mattered." Ranger stirred, as if on cue, not alert, not alarmed, just present. Reed copied the file to a fresh thumb drive, then zipped the entire archive. Triple redundancy, cloud mirror, one backup to internal affairs, one in the evidence fridge under his lunch. "They'll come for this," he said. "They'll come for him," Ava added. Later that night, Ava returned with a government-grade chip scanner. "I've used this before," she said. "Sometimes dogs came in with tech they weren't supposed to." Reed nodded. Ranger stayed still, trusting. The scanner pinged, once the usual chip. Then again, sharper. Hidden. Buried near the right shoulder. "Not police issue," Ava murmured. "No manufacturer ID. This one's private. Military grade. They could track him, condition him, even control him." Reed's eyes narrowed. They knew where he was the whole time. Ranger had stayed close to the yard, hid beneath a gas pump. Never strayed far. Not because he was confused, because he couldn't. "Digitally tethered," Ava whispered. He was still theirs. Reed crouched beside the dog, voice low. "You were never free." He looked up. "Can we remove it?" "I know someone," Ava said. "Quiet. No records." "Then we do it. Tomorrow." He rested a hand on Ranger's neck. "No more invisible leashes," he said. "You're free now. They just don't know it yet." Hours later, the decrypted folders told a darker story. Not just profiles, but trafficking. Each K9 was marked, sold, lost, in transit. The dogs were not retired. They were recycled, conditioned, shipped to private firms and foreign paramilitary groups. Reed opened the profile of another dog, K9 to 314, Reaper, conditioning, partial, compliance, high under aggressive male tones, transfer destination, Karam Defense Group, UAE. "Not a training facility," Ava murmured. "They're disappearing them." The payment logs confirmed it. Shell companies, burner accounts, routes through the Caymans. The paper trail was there, just hidden deep enough to make anyone who found it a liability. "They didn't hide it because they were scared," Reed said. "They hid it because they were sure no one would look." He clicked open a memo, garbled but readable. "Assets showing attachment or memory must be flagged. If reconditioning fails, schedule disposal. No media risk." Ava's face went pale. "They euthanized them," she said, "for remembering." Reed clenched his fists and marked Ranger expendable because he wouldn't let go of me. He looked at the dog sleeping nearby still, quiet, waiting. "They failed," he said. "We take it public," Ava said the next morning. "Full release. Press. OIG. Every badge you ever trained with, they need to know." Reed nodded. "But we do it smart." They printed documents, filed digital copies, prepared the chain of custody report. But they also scattered the data journalist tip lines, whistleblower sites, internal watchdog portals. "We don't publish it. We seed it," Reed explained. "So if one root gets pulled, another grows." Outside, the storm built in low whispers. But inside, there was no fear, just certainty. That night, Ava returned from the off-site scan clinic. The hidden chip was gone. The surgeon said Ranger barely flinched. "He didn't even whine," she said, like he knew this was the last thing they'd ever have on him. Reed crouched beside Ranger again. "You're not a risk," he whispered. "You're the proof." The next morning, Reed stood by the window, watching snow dust the trees. "We start with internal affairs," he told Ava. "Then we follow the money. Then the handlers. Then Iron Reach." Ava placed the encrypted drives into a padded bag. "And Ranger?" Reed looked down. The dog had walked through fire, pain, betrayal, and still returned to the man who never stopped looking. "He's with me," Reed said. "And this time, we're the ones showing up first." Ranger's tail gave one quiet thump, a sound like a promise. And in the quiet that followed, something larger than revenge settled over them. Truth. Unleashed. Reed Callahan sat in the half-dark of his office, the laptop's glow painting him in cold, bluish hues. Outside, the wind had calmed for the night, but a sense of something moving beneath the surface hadn't. Ranger slept behind him, breath slow, twitching now and then like his dreams carried the weight of unfinished commands. Reed opened the Tor browser, fingers steady. The screen showed what looked like a classifieds page, except the listings weren't for old cars or farm tools. These were colder, more calculated. The board was called Canis Unit, and the tagline read like something from a dead man's manual. "Where service ends, Utility begins. He didn't react. In a separate tab, Reed had carefully constructed his alias. R. Fielding 42, a blank, slate buyer, ex-military, out of the country for years. Interested in trained working dogs with prior exposure to combat scenarios. No photos. No questions. He knew better than to overplay it. The black market didn't reward desperation, it hunted it. He posted the listing at 3:47 a.m., just one line in the buyer's forum. Looking to purchase retired MAL-WDs. Immediate need, discretion expected, cash or coin. He hit post. And waited. 2 days passed. Ranger's condition slowly improved. He ate more now, though never directly from Reed's hand, always after a respectful pause, as if ensuring it wasn't bait. He didn't bark, not once. But sometimes, at night, he'd stand in the doorway of Reed's bedroom like he was guarding the past. Ava came by with a new bandage wrap and a portable EMF reader to test for stress response. Ranger passed most of it, but when she held up a worn leather leash, he froze. Memory lives deeper than scars, Ava whispered, almost to herself. Then, on the morning of the third day, Reed's burner phone buzzed once. A message. User, Lyle. We may have something. Male, 6YO. Eastern European bloodline. Former patrol asset. Loyalty intact. Partially reconditioned. Are you local? Reed read the message 3 times. The phrasing wasn't casual. It was precise, calculated. Loyalty intact wasn't a descriptor, it was a warning. Whoever Lyle was, they didn't just sell dogs. They evaluated them like weapons. He responded carefully. In state. Willing to travel. Price? A pause. Then, you'll bring $18 Kelvin. No tracking devices. No backup. Meet at Redwood Hollow Trailhead. 5 p.m. Thursday. If late, we disappear. No name. No confirmation photo. Just coordinates. Reed sat back in the chair, exhaling through his nose. Redwood Hollow. It was a stretch of state-owned forest about an hour south, long since abandoned due to landslides. No cell reception, no cameras, no patrols. Perfect for illegal deals, and perfect for ambushes. Behind him, Ranger lifted his head. You know that name? Reed asked gently. Ranger didn't move, but his eyes locked on Reed's, and for a brief second, barely a flicker, something crossed them. Recognition? Or fear? Reed looked back to the screen. We've got a bite. That night, Reed copied the chat logs into a flash drive and locked it in a safe behind his kitchen cabinet. Just in case. Ava was against the meat. It's bait, she said, arms folded, tension in every syllable. They're flushing out whoever's sniffing too close. You post, they watch, they wait, and then you show up alone in a dead forest like it's a Western standoff? Reed nodded. Yeah, I do. Why? He didn't answer right away. His voice, when it came, was quiet. Because no one else will. She stared at him, long and hard. You ever think about why that is? I think about it every day. A beat of silence. Then she sighed and walked to the fridge. Grabbed a bottle of water. Opened it. Drank. Then looked back at him. Just tell me you'll wear the vest. He managed the shadow of a smile. You'll be happy to know I never threw it away. She looked over at Ranger. And him? He stays. One twitch and they'll know he remembers. Ava crouched beside the dog. You hear that, soldier? You've got another mission. Stay home. Protect the memory. Ranger blinked once, slow and solemn. It felt like an oath. Thursday arrived, gray and cold. The GPS marked the trailhead with a barely there blue dot. Reed parked the unmarked Chevy off-road, walked the last 200 meters. No phone, no gun in plain sight. Just the vest under his jacket and the tracker Ava insisted on sewing into his bootlaces. The forest at Redwood Hollow was still scarred from past storms, trees with bent spines, root systems clinging to crumbling earth. Fog clung low to the ground, and the air smelled of pine, moss, and something else, faint oil. At 4:59 p.m., a white panel van rolled up the gravel path and stopped 15 yards ahead. The engine idled. Reed didn't move. The driver's window rolled down, slow, careful. The man inside wore gray gloves. The man in the van didn't speak. He just watched. From behind a pair of tinted aviators, his face barely visible beneath a neutral expression, and gray gloves that looked like they'd never known dirt, Reed stood 10 yards away, still, unreadable. The only sound between them, the low idle of the engine and the distant call of a crow circling somewhere in the redwoods. The sun had dropped behind the tree line. Shadows pooled like waiting things. "You're early," the man finally said, voice low but crisp. Polished East Coast accent, Ivy League, with a military polish. "Traffic was light," Reed replied. The man opened the door and stepped out. Movements precise. Not too fast. Not threatening. But trained. Definitely trained. He was tall, clean-shaven, and beneath the gray jacket was a holster half concealed at his right hip. His boots were military grade, but scuffed like they'd been through more mud than boardrooms. He extended a gloved hand. "Lyle." Reed didn't take it. Lyle's hand hovered in the air for a second too long, then dropped. "All right," Lyle said with a small shrug. "Straight to business." He opened the van's rear door. Inside was a crate. Clean metal, standard K9 transport model. But the interior was dark, and there was no sound, no breathing, no dog. Just a space that looked prepared. Too prepared. Reed's gut tensed. "Where's the dog?" Leal didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped back from the van and gave a small nod. That's when Reed heard it, a crunch in the woods behind him. Not a squirrel. Not the wind. A boot. Then, another. He turned fast, hand already drifting toward his side, but too late. Something slammed into him from behind shoulder. Solid mass. Trained angle. He hit the ground hard, gravel cutting his cheek. His hand shot to his belt, but another figure was already there, pinning his wrist. Then a second knee drove into his ribs. Air shot out of his lungs. He tried to twist training kicking in, but there were too many hands. Too much weight. Someone grabbed the back of his neck and forced his head into the cold dirt. The forest spun sideways. "You're not here to buy a dog," a voice hissed near his ear. Not Lyle's, rougher. "You're here to resurrect ghosts." A third man now. Reed caught a glimpse. Broad shoulders, ski mask, black coat. The second attacker stayed silent, methodical. Their movements weren't erratic, they were coordinated. This wasn't a mugging. This was protocol. Lyle stepped into view above him, calm as ever. "I told you no backup. No recordings," he said, eyes scanning Reed's body like he was reading an old blueprint. "But you wore a vest, which means there's a transmitter." Lyle crouched, his gloved hands brushing along Reed's collarbone, tapping. Then, lower, stopping at the boot. He found it. A slight vibration. Then the sound of plastic snapping. The tracker was gone. "Do you know what happens?" Lyle said quietly. "When someone tries to outmaneuver a system designed by men who've already erased every trace of what came before." Reed's lips tasted blood. "You start to get sloppy." The man in the ski mask drove his knee harder into Reed's back. "Let me guess," Lyle said, voice still cool, almost amused. "You thought posting on the boards would spook us. That you'd shine a little light and we'd scatter like rats. But you're not dealing with rats. You're dealing with professionals." "You're dealing with cowards," Reed spat. That earned him a sharp blow to the ribs. Stars burst in his vision. Lyle sighed, disappointed. "Detective Callahan, you were good, clean record, commendations. But you should have stayed retired. Because where this goes next..." He pulled something from his jacket, not a gun. A small black phone. No screen, just a single red button. "You won't come back from." Reed's breath came in shallow pulls now. His wrists were zip-tied behind him. The gravel beneath him was damp with frost and blood. The woods felt like they were holding their breath. Lyle stood. "Take his ID. Dump him in the hollow. If he gets out, fine. If not, well, he'll be another cautionary tale." The two men bent to lift him. But then, a low, echoing growl. It didn't come from the men. It came from the trees. The kind of growl that came from something ancient, something injured, but not broken. Then a flash of fur. Ranger. He came out of the brush like smoke made of muscle and memory, teeth bared, eyes locked on the masked man. "No," Lyle barked, reaching for his gun. Too late. The man closest to Reed went down first, arm caught in a jaw that refused to let go. Screams tore through the woods. The second turned and ran, but Ranger was faster. Reed, coughing through blood, rolled toward a rock and slammed it against his zip ties with everything left in him. Once, twice, snap, free. He grabbed the dropped sidearm from one of the men and aimed only to find Ranger already standing over Lyle, one paw on the man's chest, not biting, just watching. Like he was waiting for permission, Reed stood slowly, blood at the corner of his mouth, heart hammering. He met Ranger's eyes and nodded. The next sound was the wind, and Lyle screaming. There was a beat of silence after the scream. Then the forest exploded. Ranger came through the fog like a shadow torn loose, a blur of muscle, rage, and perfect control. His growl cracked the air like thunder, low and primal, not from fear, but from memory. It wasn't wild. It wasn't panic. It was precision. The masked man closest to Reed didn't have time to turn. Ranger struck him from the side, fangs burying deep into the padded forearm he tried to raise too late. The man dropped with a howl, more shock than pain, and tried to roll. But Ranger stayed on top, weight distributed like a trained soldier. Not a dog, a weapon deployed. "Ranger," Reed rasped. But the word caught in his throat. Lyle staggered back, hand darting for his concealed weapon. "Control your damn animal!" Reed's eyes snapped to the ground where the second attacker had dropped a compact Glock. He dove for it, ribs screaming in protest, vision tunneling. Gravel tore at his palms as he slid. Gun in hand. He turned. Lyle froze, hands up, the barrel pointed between his eyes. "Move, and I drop you." From his position on the forest floor, Lyle offered a tight smile. "You won't shoot. You're still wearing the badge in your head." Reed clicked off the safety. "Try me." Ranger released the downed man at a single word, not shouted but firm. "Enough." The German shepherd didn't look at Reed. His eyes remained locked on the second man, who was now trying to crawl backward into the brush. Ranger stalked toward him, steps measured, low to the ground like a phantom. Reed fired a warning shot into the dirt just inches from the man's hand. "Don't!" The crawling stopped. A cough rasped out of Reed's chest. His lungs burned from earlier, ribs probably cracked. Blood crusted at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Lyle, whose calm had finally begun to crack around the edges. "This sting," Reed said, voice rough but steady, "is recorded. Surveillance drone's been circling for the last 6 minutes. Your face is on camera. Your voice, your threats." Lyle's eyes flicked upward, scanning the canopy. "You're bluffing!" Reed smiled grimly. "Am I?" He holstered the pistol, pulled a second zip tie from his back pocket, the irony didn't escape him, and bound Lyle's hands behind his back. Then he moved to the other two, keeping the weapon trained on them as he patted down their jackets for weapons, wallets, and phones. And then he found it. Inside Lyle's coat pocket, a small black digital recorder. He clicked it. The voice was unmistakable. "Lyle, clients want clean dogs. They don't want hesitation. If they don't obey, we finish them. That's the protocol." Click. Silence. Ranger stood a few feet away, still, his breath steady, ears pricked. He didn't move until Reed looked at him, and then just then the dog approached, slowly, quietly, and sat beside him, the same place he used to sit when he was a working dog. Reed felt something crack open inside his chest. Not a rib, something older, something he'd buried years ago, after losing his partner in that warehouse fire, after Ranger vanished, after the system told him to move on. But now this was proof, not just of abuse, not just trafficking, but of conspiracy, of erasure. Reed radioed it in. "Dispatch, this is Lieutenant Callahan. Suspects in custody at Redwood Hollow perimeter. Evidence secured. Requesting immediate backup, medics, and transport. And tell Ava." He paused, glancing at the dog beside him. "Tell her." Ranger came home. There was a long silence on the line. Then, "Copy that. On our way." Wind moved through the trees above like a tired breath. Ranger nudged Reed's hand gently with his nose, not for praise, but for reassurance. The hall was colder than expected. Marigold Ridge Civic Auditorium hadn't hosted a crowd this size in years, not since the last mayoral debate, not since the county fair shut down. But today, the air was thick with something heavier than politics. It was the weight of silence waiting to break. Wooden chairs creaked under the shifting bodies of officers in dress blues, journalists with open laptops, veterans in faded campaign pins, and behind them, civilians, activists, animal rights advocates, mothers holding framed photos of dogs that never came home. Some clasped old collars in their hands. One woman held a leash with no dog attached. At the front of the stage, flanked by 2 flags, sat a single table. Reed Callahan sat behind it. To his right, calm but alert, was Ranger, or rather, Axel, as the registry would now reflect. His ears twitched slightly at the sound of camera shutters, but he made no sound. His coat was clean but still patchy in places. A faint scar traced the side of his snout like a half-forgotten brand. He sat not like a dog, but like a witness. Lieutenant Callahan, the committee chair, spoke into the microphone. "You may proceed with your statement." Reed stood. He didn't read from notes. "I was an officer for 17 years before I first met Axel. We called him Ranger then. He served with the department's tactical unit drug interdiction, search and rescue, high-risk entries. And he never hesitated. Not once." His eyes scanned the room, not searching for approval, but making sure the truth landed where it needed to. 3 years ago, Ranger was declared reassigned. That was the official word. In reality, he disappeared. Records erased. His handler dead. Questions unanswered. I was told it was an internal error, a miscommunication. He paused. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the ceiling fans. Last month I found Ranger burned, bound, and left to die in a junkyard SUV. A ripple moved through the audience like a quiet gasp that never found its breath. Reed rested a hand lightly on Ranger's back. The dog didn't move, but his tail brushed the floor once. Just once. Over the last several weeks, we uncovered a pattern of retired 9-second, not adopted, not housed, sold, conditioned, reprogrammed. Those that didn't comply were silenced. He lifted a folder from the table and opened it. Inside were pages of evidence, copies of handler IDs, rerouted microchip logs, invoices marked Iron Reach Logistics. One had Ranger's profile, the words extreme loyalty, potential risk, stamped in red. They called him an asset, Reed said. Not a partner, not a life, just a tool. Something to discard or control. There was a stillness in the room now, not from disbelief, but from reckoning. Many knew pieces of this story, but few had seen the whole truth laid bare. Reed's voice lowered, but carried further. You don't leash loyalty, you earn it. And when you break that bond, when you turn it into something transactional, it doesn't just destroy the dog, it destroys the human too. He looked out toward the front row. Dr. Ava Sinclair sat there, her arms folded, jaw tight. She gave a slow nod, not one of encouragement, but of acknowledgement. This was no longer just testimony. This was truth being documented. In the rear of this hall, Reed said, gesturing with his chin, there's a wall. Carved into it are the names of officers lost in the line of duty. Today, I ask that we consider a new plaque one for Canine Second who served, and were never given the dignity of a record. He reached down and picked up a thin metal tag from the table, worn, almost unreadable. It was Ranger's original military-style ID. No name, just the number, 817 KN. I'm not here for justice. That's too late for some. I'm here for remembrance and reform. Axel Ranger shifted slightly, his front paw sliding forward. His eyes swept the hall not with fear, but with the awareness of a creature who had once been hunted and now stood unafraid. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Lieutenant, one final question. Yes. Would you consider establishing a formal inquiry task force? Something permanent? Reed hesitated, looked down at the dog beside him, then answered, We already have a team. He's sitting right here. And the room packed with badges and scars, memory and guilt, rose in applause. Not thunderous, but honest, like mourning turning into motion. They turned the lights down, not out of drama, but necessity. In the center of the civic auditorium, a 12-foot projection screen flickered to life, its white canvas humming softly behind the podium where Reed Callahan stood. His uniform was the same, but his posture had changed, no longer burdened, but anchored, as if telling the truth had added weight to his spine instead of taking it away. Ranger, no. Axel lay at the base of the stage, his head on crossed paws, ears angled slightly back. Always listening. Reed stepped aside, clicking a small remote in his hand. The first image appeared. A spreadsheet. Stark. Cold. Dozens of entries across multiple years. Dates. Canine designations. Retired checkboxes. All were marked with identical destination codes. IRL 7, IRL 12, IRL 22, Iron Reach Logistics. Reed's voice echoed through the still room. These are transfer logs submitted to the Federal Working Dog Registry. Most appear routine. But notice the right column. No retirement shelters, no civilian adopters, only internal facility codes. He clicked again. The next slide showed falsified adoption forms, different handler names, but identical handwriting. One ID belonged to a man named Ellis Crane, a name Reed had already traced to a warehouse in Denver, where 3 canine second were found sedated and malnourished in steel crates. "Mr. Crane doesn't exist," Reed said, stepping back into frame. "Nor do any of the handlers listed on these documents. Each one is tied to Iron Reach, each one a paper mask for trafficking military animals as disposable assets." A hush fell across the room. Not stunned silence, but the type of hush people give when they already know something is wrong. And now they see it confirmed. Click. The screen now displayed the waveform of an audio file. The voice was scratchy, mid-range, and unmistakably real. "If they obey, fine. If not, finish them. These aren't pets. They're tools. You break the ones that resist." Reed didn't speak during the clip. He didn't need to. The words branded themselves across the room. "That was recorded by a body mic during the sting at Redwood Hollow," Reed said once the clip ended. "The voice belongs to a man operating under the alias Lyle. His real name is Franklin Dorrance. Former tactical dog handler, dishonorably discharged in 2018 for excessive force. Since then, he's acted as Iron Reach's enforcement arm conditioning and disposing of dogs that fail to perform." A low rustle moved through the press bench. Cameras clicked. One woman covered her mouth. A man in the front row, likely ex-law enforcement, by the look of his bearing, dropped his head into his hands. Click. The screen displayed a purchase order sanitized on the surface. Security Asset Procurement. Vendor. IRL. Buyer. Private firm in New Mexico. Attached to the file. Microchip number 982004117A021. "That's Ranger," Reed said. "Sold. Twice. Reprogrammed. Once by 4 drugs, once by electric stimulation." His loyalty was so deeply embedded, they saw it as a threat. Ava Sinclair, seated nearby, folded her arms tight. She had seen those scars. She had touched them. Under her breath, she whispered, "They tried to burn out what made him human." Click. Now the screen showed a side-by-side image, 2 photos of dogs, one with alert posture and tactical gear, the other slumped behind a cage wall. Same eyes, same ID. There were 12 such comparisons. One for each dog listed as reconditioned failure. Ladies and gentlemen," Reed said softly, "we've spent decades giving these dogs titles K9, officer, partner, asset. But somewhere along the way, someone stopped seeing them as living." He turned toward the far right side of the room, where a full-length bulletin board had been rolled in and covered with black cloth. Reed walked to it now. With both hands, he pulled the cloth away. Behind it, photos, dog tags, old service patches, a wall of names. Axel's was the first, followed by Tala, Reggie, Holt, Bravo, Kuma, Sienna, and 5 others. Each file had a small line beneath. Served, silenced, remembered. Reed faced the crowd again. His voice was calm but razor clear. "These were not just dogs. They were veterans. And they were betrayed not by war, but by greed." Murmurs surged now, some from the civilian gallery, others from the uniformed men and women sitting stiffly, realizing they had unknowingly signed papers that pushed these dogs out of the system. "Every person listed in these documents will be handed over to the appropriate federal agencies tonight," Reed said. Names include Franklin Dorrance, former Captain Sean Keller, logistics manager Inez Morano, and he held up a final folder marked with a crimson seal. Deputy Commissioner Blake Arlen. Gasps. Commissioner Arlen was a state-level figure. His badge once hung in the same row as Reed's. He funded the acquisitions, he altered the registry logs, and he approved the destruction orders. Reed closed the file. And now, we all know. He looked to Axel, who was sitting up now watching Reed, not with fear or concern, but something older than both: recognition. In the back row, someone stood. A woman, mid-52nd, eyes rimmed with tears. She held up a photo of a black and tan German shepherd wearing a SWAT vest. "My dog's name was Knox," she said, voice breaking. "He disappeared 4 years ago. No one ever answered me." Reed didn't answer either. He just nodded once. So did Axel. And for a long moment, the room didn't need words, only the wall of names, and what it meant to finally see them again. The sun broke through overcast skies the way grace breaks through grief, slow, quiet, persistent. It spilled soft gold over the Capitol courtyard, warming the marbled podium draped in red, white, and navy. A hush blanketed the crowd, gathered there hundreds of people, shoulder to shoulder, bundled in coats, holding up handmade signs. But no one spoke, because this moment didn't belong to them. It belonged to the dog seated at the center of the platform. Ranger, or as the certificate read, Sergeant Axel, K9 retired, sat with calm posture, chest lifted, scarred ears slightly twitching in the wind. He didn't wear a uniform, but somehow he looked more official than anyone else present, as if even the medals knew who they truly belonged to. Governor Mallory stepped forward, her voice steady behind the microphone. "Today we honor not only bravery, but sacrifice. Not just obedience, but unwavering loyalty." She turned slightly, glancing at Axel. "This medal," she said, lifting the dark velvet box, "is the highest award our state offers to a canine in service. But truthfully, no piece of metal can measure what this dog endured or what he saved." The crowd stirred. A child's voice rang out, unplanned but pure. "That's the hero dog," a boy whispered. Another voice, smaller, softer, followed. "He's the one from the fire." A few feet from the front row, a little girl with chestnut curls and mittens too big for her hands stood holding a cardboard sign. The letters were hand-painted and slightly crooked, but the message was clear: "You saved him. Now he saves others." Reed saw it from where he stood off stage. His throat tightened. She must have been 6 or 7, probably didn't understand the politics or the press. But she understood something deeper, the way children often do when they haven't been told to forget. Axel's gaze drifted toward her. Just once. Just long enough. The governor leaned down, unfastened the medal, a bronze star in the shape of a paw, and with surprising gentleness clipped it to Axel's custom black collar. "He was discarded," she said, voice hushed now. "Erased. But he never stopped showing up. Never stopped fighting." She stepped back. For a beat, no one moved. And then someone in the crowd stood. A woman in uniform. Then another. Then the sheriff of Marigold Ridge. Then a former canine handler. Then someone in plain clothes, clutching a faded photo of a dog long gone. They all rose, slowly, one by one, in a wave of reverence that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with memory. The little girl still holding the sign raised it higher. Her dad helped her hold it steady as tears streaked her cheeks. Axel stood, as if summoned not by command, but by instinct. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stood tall. And the entire crowd, as if pulled by one thread, began to clap. Not loud at first, just soft, rippling applause, like rain on rooftops. Real. Earned. Human. Reed looked down at his hands, curled tightly behind his back. He didn't know when they started trembling. He thought of the night he found Axel bloodied, burned, bound in zip ties inside a flaming car, and how, even then, the dog hadn't whimpered for himself. He thought of how Axel hid under tables at the sound of a horn, or twitched at the word run. He thought of the night Axel charged through the trees and saved him without a moment's hesitation. And now here he was, not just surviving, but seen. As the applause swelled, Reed noticed Ava off to the side, her gloved hands red from clapping. She wasn't smiling. Not exactly. It was something more fragile than that relief, threaded with grief. She had once sedated dogs like Axel, thinking she had no choice. But today, she stood witness to what survival looked like. The governor waited until the crowd quieted again before speaking. "There's a saying among handlers. The leash goes two ways. That what a dog takes on, we take on too. But in this case, she said, glancing toward Reed, one man refused to let that leash end in silence. Reed didn't step forward. He didn't need to. Axel turned and walked to him instead. Tail still, posture proud. The little girl pushed through the crowd, and Reed gently guided her forward. She knelt slowly, holding out her mittened hand. Axel pressed his nose into her palm, and just like that, every camera shutter fell silent. This moment wouldn't need retakes, wouldn't need edits, because the real story wasn't about medals. It was about survival. It was about return. It was about the ones who get back up and the ones who stand by them when they do. The storm had scattered by nightfall, leaving Marigold Ridge washed and glistening beneath a halo of street lamps. Reed's house, tucked at the edge of Whitlow Street, glowed warm behind frost-rimmed windows. Inside, logs crackled in the stone hearth, throwing restless patterns of amber across hardwood floors scuffed by years of boots. And now, pause. Ranger lay closest to the flames, chin on crossed forelegs, eyes half closed but not asleep. The medal he'd worn earlier had been removed, set in a velvet shadow box on the mantel. It caught firelight in muted flashes, less a trophy than a nightlight for memories that still stalked the dark. To Ranger's left dozed Tango, the Belgian Malinois rescued 2 weeks prior, one eye cloudy with blindness, the other bright as spilled moonlight. His breathing was quick, almost delicate, like each inhale was an audition for safety. Every so often his ears flicked toward Ranger, reassurance that the larger shepherd remained close. On the opposite side, just outside the direct heat, Roscoe rested. He was older, fur-grizzled, a shepherd mix whose left ear bent permanently at an odd angle souvenir from an IED blast overseas. PTSD turned his nights to minefields. Sweat, damp nightmares left him pacing until dawn. But tonight, he slept. Not deeply, but willingly. That alone felt like a small miracle. Ava Sinclair sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, nursing a mug of spiced cider that steamed against the chilly glass of the windows behind her. Reed occupied the armchair opposite, one boot propped on the brick edge of the hearth, his own cider untouched on the side table. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was hospice quiet, the hush of people waiting for a patient here, 3 of them to keep breathing. A log popped. Sparks whirled up the chimney. "House smells different," Ava murmured at last. Reed raised an eyebrow. "Less like sawdust and aftershave," she clarified, managing half a smile. "More like dog and cedar." "Huh?" "I'll take that as an upgrade," Reed said. His voice was soft, edges sanded down by exhaustion and peace. They lapsed back into silence, watching the rhythmic rise of canine chests. Ranger twitched once, back leg kicking at some phantom pursuit, then settled. Tango sensed it, blind eyes scanning an invisible dream horizon, until he, too, relaxed. Roscoe simply sighed an old man's sigh, tired but satisfied. Ava took a sip of cider. "Do you ever think about how none of them asked for any of this? Glory, war, medals?" Reed stared into the fire. "I think about it every minute. I'm not busy trying to fix it." A beat. Snow began to tap against the windows again, gentler now, like fingertips instead of fists. "Axel looks lighter," Ava said. "He's still Ranger to me," Reed replied, then corrected himself in a tone that was less apology than confession. "Axel for the world, Ranger for us." Ava nodded. "Names are bridges. Sometimes you have to build a new one before the old one can hold weight again." Reed finally lifted his mug, warmth seeping into cold, numbed fingers. Cinnamon and apple rose with the steam, mingling with pine from the crackling logs. "You remember the first time we met?" Ava asked. "University food court. You were protesting animal testing. I was 2 credits deep into criminal psych. No. And you told me," she said, mimicking his younger, cockier tone, "every fight needs both a sword and a shield." Reed smirked. "And you called me a bumper sticker philosopher?" She raised her mug in salute. "Still true." Silence returned, but it felt fuller, like air filling a room that had been vacuum sealed too long. On the rug, Tango's paws began paddling softly. Roscoe answered with a low grumble, as if reminding the younger dog that dreams could be quieter. Ranger opened one eye, surveyed his squad, and closed it again, Captain satisfied with the watch. Ava set her mug down, leaning forward. So what now, Lieutenant? Task force? Court testimonies? More headlines? Reed's gaze never left the fire. All of that. But first we make this house a sanctuary. For these three. For the next ones. You're turning your living room into a halfway home for traumatized heroes. Someone has to. She smiled at the conviction. At the ease with which he said heroes and meant it. A log collapsed into embers. Ranger lifted his head, nose twitching, then nudged forward until his muzzle touched Reed's boot. Reed lowered a hand, fingers threading through coarse fur. Tango scooted closer to the shepherd's warmth. Roscoe shifted again, this time not in restlessness, but in the timid way old souls seek companionship. 3 dogs by the fire. Not a platoon. Not assets. Just survivors forming a perimeter of shared breath and slow healing. Ava watched the tableau, eyes glistening. You ever think scars can be beautiful? Reed looked down at the patchy fur beneath his palm. The faint lines like old roads leading home. Only because they mean the story didn't end where it hurt the most. Outside, the wind found a new path through the eaves, humming a lullaby tuned in minor keys. Inside, the fireplace dimmed to a soft glow, embers pulsing like distant galaxies. Reed tipped his cider toward the hearth in a silent toast. Ava mirrored him. To endings that become beginnings, she whispered. To every dog that refuses to stay silent, Reed answered. In the flicker of firelight, Ranger looked up at them, eyes amber, alive, and for the first time since the night under the rusted gas pump, his tail thumped twice against the rug. No applause followed, no cameras flashed, just cider and silence, and 3 dogs learning that the world could still be warm. The porch hadn't changed much since Reed moved into the old house paint flaking off the railings, a wind chime missing 1 aluminum pipe, and the rocking chair that let out a soft groan every time it shifted. But that afternoon, everything felt different. The air was still. Not the kind of stillness that begged for sound, but the kind that felt like an answer. Reed stepped outside carrying 2 things, an old fleece blanket tucked under his arm, and the same case file he'd been reading the night Ranger came home. He didn't need it anymore, not for justice, not even for closure. But something about holding it grounded him. Maybe because it was the last thing he'd had open when Ranger first made eye contact. He eased into the rocking chair, set the file on the small table beside him, and unfolded the blanket across his lap not because he was cold, but because he hoped the warmth might invite someone else. And then he waited. The door behind him remained ajar. He didn't call, didn't whistle, just waited. The soft sound of padded steps came minutes later, tentative but deliberate. 1, pause. 2, pause. The old floorboards creaked under paws, not used to wandering freely. And then the sound of a gentle exhale. Ranger appeared. He stood at the threshold of the porch, like a soldier unsure if he was off duty yet. The sunlight caught the edges of his coat, still patchy in places from the burns, but healing slowly. His tail gave a single sweep, then stilled. "You're okay," Reed murmured. Not as a command, but a reminder. Ranger didn't blink. He stepped forward. Not rushed, not hesitant, just present, as if his body had finally stopped expecting pain. And then, with a grace Reed would never fully understand, Ranger walked to him and rested his chin on Reed's knee. The contact was light, barely there, but it sent something deeper than a shiver through Reed's chest, like a key slipping into a lock that hadn't turned in years. Reed didn't pet him. He didn't want to break whatever quiet contract had just been made. Instead, he exhaled slowly, leaning back into the chair, letting the moment breathe. From the yard, the wind stirred the last few brown leaves clinging to the fence line. A pair of crows squabbled somewhere in the pine tree. The world, as always, continued. But for once, Reed didn't feel like he was chasing after it. Ranger closed his eyes. For 10 seconds, then 20, then more. His weight didn't shift. He didn't flinch at a passing car down the hill. No growl. No bolt. He just stayed. Reed had spent years believing in justice, but only recently had he begun to believe in repair. In this, the quiet miracle of presence. He reached slowly, letting his fingers hover over Ranger's head before resting lightly behind the ear that had been stitched up months ago. Ranger didn't move. "You're not a weapon," Reed said softly. "You're not a number. Not anymore." And somehow, he knew Ranger already understood. The wind picked up again, this time brushing loose a folded corner of the case file. Reed glanced over and caught sight of a line in his own handwriting, one he'd scribbled in anger months ago, when Ranger's retirement records had vanished. "They don't lose dogs like this. They erase them." He closed the file. No need to reopen what had already been exposed. He looked down. Ranger was still there, chin still resting, chest rising in rhythm, eyes closed, like he finally trusted the ground not to vanish beneath him. And that, Reed realized, was the point. It wasn't the trials, the subpoenas, the medal, even the headlines. It was this: the dog with no name, finally letting the silence be safe. The man with too many regrets finally learning that presence didn't require penance. Reed leaned his head back and watched the clouds begin to break. "You can stay," he said quietly, "as long as you want." There was no response. None needed. Because some bonds, the real ones, don't start with grand gestures or dramatic rescues. They start with this: one scarred man, one broken dog, and the space between them no longer empty. The building was modest red brick trimmed in white, with old security lights that flickered more than they worked, a converted wing of the old municipal shelter. It now bore a new sign above its door: Sanctuary Echo, for those who served without question. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and clean fur. The linoleum had been replaced by reclaimed wood. Windows were wide, letting in the afternoon sun that spilled across the floor in slanted gold. The plaque wasn't big, not loud or gilded, but it was the first thing you saw when you stepped through the front entrance. Mounted on a dark oak board just above eye level, framed with quiet reverence. Letters carved, not printed, into the wood. Justice for retired canines. They served with loyalty, we honor with action. Underneath, badges were placed one by one. Each one had a story. Some had numbers, some had names. Some had neither, only dates and a single fading paw print embossed in brass. Reed stood before the wall in silence. He wasn't in uniform, just an old gray jacket and jeans that smelled faintly of ash and pine. In his hand, he held something he'd kept folded in a drawer for months, now smoothed flat, polished, ready. Ranger's badge. Unit 73K. It had been returned quietly last week, in an envelope with no return address. Just the words. He earned it back. "I?" Reed's fingers trembled slightly as he clipped it into the small brass hook prepared for it. To its left hung the badge of Titan, the first K9 the sanctuary had ever recovered. To the right, a blank space left for the next name no one knew yet. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. From behind, footsteps approached. Ava. She walked slower than usual, not because she was tired, but because this place had a weight to it. Not heavy. Sacred. Ranger padded beside her. Calm, alert, ears turning at every distant bark from the rear kennels. He wasn't a resident here. He never would be. But he was family. And this wall was his. Ava stopped beside Reed. Said nothing at first. Then, quietly, "Do you remember what he looked like the night you pulled him from that fire?" Reed nodded once. "Not something I could forget." "And now?" He glanced at Ranger. The dog was sitting by the wall, eyes resting on the badges like they meant something. Maybe they did. "He's still healing," Reed said. "But he's whole." Ava smiled, faint, tired, real. "Then that makes two of you." They stood in silence. From the hallway came the echo of a young handler calling commands to a newly arrived dog. The rhythm of voice and paw. A second chance in motion. Reed's eyes drifted to the small inscription etched in the lower right corner of the plaque. It was something Ava had insisted on, including, "A dog remembers every command but never forgets who believed in them." He swallowed. It wasn't about heroism. Not really. Not about takedowns or missions or even medals. It was about loyalty that never asked for praise. About pain endured in silence. About coming back. Reed reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple strip of dark leather. Ranger's first collar, burnt and frayed at the edges. The metal tag melted into a vague oval. He didn't hang it, just rested it gently on the table beneath the wall. beside a photo of Titan and a list of names still waiting to be found. Ava watched his hand linger. Then she reached forward and placed something next to it, a folded page from the first intake form she ever wrote at the sanctuary. At the top, unidentified male, German Shepherd, 4 to 6 years old, trauma indicators, severe, eyes, focused, behavior, waiting. She smiled. He wasn't waiting for rescue. He was waiting for purpose. Reed looked at her, and for the first time in months, let himself believe the work wasn't just about stopping the bad. It was about building the good. Slowly, brick by brick, dog by dog, they stepped back. Let the wall breathe. Outside, the breeze stirred the trees, lining the edge of the property. Beyond them, the world still spun noisy, fast, messy. But in here, time moved differently, slower, more honest. Ranger stepped forward and sniffed at the plaque. Then, as if sensing something no human could, sat down and stared at it unmoving, upright. Reed didn't interrupt, because maybe dogs understand tribute in a way words can't explain. Maybe standing watch is its own kind of honor. And maybe this wall, quiet, sturdy, full of names once forgotten, was finally enough to say, "We see you now." It was morning in Sanctuary Echo. Soft light spilled through the long row of eastern windows, casting golden lines across the kennel floors. The hum of quiet activity filled the air, not frantic, not sterile, but lived in, peaceful. A low whimper here, a cautious bark there, nothing loud, just life returning. Reed stood by the main office window with a clipboard in one hand and a half-empty coffee mug in the other. His handwriting was rough but steady now. Each line marked not with just a number, but a name, a fate, a future. 27. That was the current count. 27 dogs. Each one pulled from rusted chains, abandoned warehouses, fake training contracts, and backroom transport vans. Each one with stories that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. He read the names softly under his breath, or at least the ones they'd been able to give. Bruno, Tess, Mako, Ember, Ghost, Juno, Abel, Delta, Finn, and of course, Ranger. Down near the courtyard, Ava crouched beside 2 kennels, whispering something as she coaxed a nervous Malinois to take a step outside. The dog hesitated, tail stiff, body rigid, then, slowly, followed. Reed watched the moment unfold, like it always did. Not dramatic, just sacred. On the whiteboard inside the main building, someone had written in bright red marker, 2 reunited, 4 fostered, 7 candidates for therapy transition, 14 under evaluation, all safe. There was a small hand-drawn paw print beside it, followed by a message in looping child's handwriting. "Thank you for saving my hero. Love, Ellie, age 9. A stack of mail sat on the front desk, not bills, for once. Reed picked up the newest envelope, its return label decorated with glitter and little paw stickers, from a 3rd-grade class in Fayetteville. He opened it. Inside were 16 folded drawings, crayon bright and full of stick-figure dogs wearing capes, medals, or sunglasses. One said, "To Ranger, you are the bravest dog in the world." Another showed a cartoon German Shepherd beside a smiling officer and read, "Dear dog, I hope you get peanut butter today. Ugh." And at the bottom of the package, a note from the teacher. "We've started a collection drive. So far, we've raised $162, and the kids sent 48 tennis balls, 7 collars, and 3 homemade fleece blankets. They voted to name the drive More Than One Ranger." Reed smiled, the kind of smile that rises from the chest, not just the mouth. Because that was the point now. It wasn't just about one dog anymore. Not just one mission. One wrong. One redemption. Ranger padded in from the hallway, tail low but not tucked, head slightly tilted as if he could sense the shift in Reed's thoughts. His gait was slower these days, still favoring the leg that had taken the worst of the burns. But his eyes, they were steady. Clear. Reed knelt and rubbed the thick fur at the base of Ranger's neck. "You hear that?" he murmured. You've got a movement named after you now. And 4. The dog gave a short, satisfied chuff, a sound Reed had come to think of as half a bark, half a thank you. Behind them, the door creaked open. It was Jamila, one of the volunteers, carrying a cardboard box almost too wide for her arms. "New delivery from Everhart High School," she said, grinning. 50 tennis balls, 20 thank you notes, and— she paused dramatically. "A batch of handmade treats. Chicken and pumpkin." Ranger's ears perked. Reed laughed. "You'd better hide those from Bruno." The building had changed over the weeks. What was once a place for silence and second chances had become something more an ecosystem of healing. Visitors came not to gawk, but to give. Local businesses donated food. A tech company set up a GPS-safe collar program. A retired K9 handler drove in from Oregon just to sit with the dogs no one else could touch. And in the corner of the sanctuary's website now lived a small, steady counter. Lives were squed, 27. Handlers, reunited, 2. Dogs healed, in progress. Reed stood slowly, brushing the dust from his knee, and glanced back at the drawing taped near the entrance, the one with Ranger's face, sketched in pencil by a child with careful hands. The words underneath had faded slightly, but he'd memorized them already. Even when nobody believed him, he still protected them all. Ava entered then, wiping her hands on a towel, her expression tired but lit with quiet pride. "Delta let me touch his nose today," she said. "First time since we brought him in." Reed raised his brows. "That's progress." "It is," she nodded. "And progress is what we build from." They stood in silence. Through the open window, the sounds of dogs barking, volunteers laughing, and wheels rolling on gravel filled the air. Not a sanctuary of sorrow. A sanctuary of purpose. And in that moment, surrounded by names reclaimed, lives restored, and a dog who once emerged from fire, Reed realized something deeper. There is no such thing as just one ranger. There are many, waiting, watching, protecting, and now, finally, being seen. It started with a yellow envelope. No return address, just the words "Echo Knows" typed on the back in all caps. Inside were 6 pages, printed from an old dot matrix printer. Lines fuzzy, margins uneven, but the information clear as glass. GPS coordinates, facility codes, transport logs. The header of one document simply read, "Asset Handling, Phase 3. Below it, Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, Utah. A second envelope arrived 2 days later, this time from a P.O. box in Arizona. It contained photographs, grainy, time-stamped, of a long black truck unloading crates behind a shuttered police K9 academy. Then came the email. Sent through 5 VPN bounces, routed through Iceland. You exposed one. There are more. You have their attention. Be ready. Reed sat in the small conference room of Sanctuary Echo, the one they'd converted into an operations center. The map of the U.S. stretched across one wall now, a tangle of red pushpins and curling string. He stared at it, quiet, not overwhelmed, just still. The kind of stillness that knows what comes next will cost everything. Again. Across from him sat Ava, laptop open, her eyes flicking back and forth as she decrypted more files from the anonymous tips. A heat map bloomed on her screen clusters, forming around decommissioned training facilities, abandoned kennels, privatized security contracts. 7 sites confirmed, she murmured. 4 more under suspicion. And this one, she pointed to a dot in Montana. It's registered under the same logistics firm we found in Redwood Hollow, Iron Reach. Reed leaned back in his chair. It's not just a cover-up anymore, it's infrastructure. A knock tapped gently at the door. It was Chief Rourke, now retired, stepping in with a folder in hand. He was the one who first believed Reed, the one who helped open the first door when this whole thing was labeled sensitive internal misclassification. He set the folder down. Senate subcommittees called an emergency session, he said. They're forming a national task force. Reed blinked. Already? The floodgates open now, Rourke said. You cracked it. Lyle's audio confession, the chip rerouting, the financial trails, it's undeniable. And now with these files coming in, he tapped the envelope on the table. They want to act. Ava looked up. Who's leading it? Joint Command. Department of Justice, U.S. Marshals, Homeland Security. He paused, then added, "They want you in the advisory circle." Reed was silent, not from doubt, but because something bigger was clicking into place. He walked over to the far wall and looked at the board they'd built, the one with photos of every dog rescued. Some faces were cautious, some still haunted, some already grinning. But right in the center of it all was one photo that anchored the whole story. Ranger. Scarred, solemn, regal. The day he received the Canine Medal of Valor, he had stood beside Reed, unmoving, almost statuesque except for his eyes. In them, something burned low and steady. Not pride, not relief, just presence, a quiet knowing. And now, he was everywhere. His image was printed on banners and awareness posters across the state. They served. We failed. Now we fix it. His profile was featured in an educational PSA campaign backed by the Canine Handler Association. A children's book was being written about him. 2 foundations reached out to license his name for outreach and support. And as of this morning, the National Task Force for Retired Canine Welfare listed his story and the video of his rescue as Exhibit 1. Ranger wasn't just a dog anymore. He was the face of something long overdue. And yet, he remained unchanged. Out in the gravel courtyard, the German Shepherd lay curled beneath the oak bench, his ear twitching occasionally at birdsong or a breeze. Kids had come by earlier with tennis balls and thank you cards. But now, it was quiet, just him and the late morning sun. Reed stepped out into the open air and walked slowly to where Ranger lay. He didn't call him, just walked. Ranger opened one eye, then the other. No bark, no movement. Reed sat down beside him, the wooden bench creaking softly. He didn't speak right away. Didn't need to. Instead, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket, one of the anonymous tips. The top corner had a coffee stain, and the edges were curled. But in the center, scribbled in blocky handwriting, were 4 words. "You've got more work." Ranger shifted, raised his head, pressed his chin gently against Reed's boot. No wag, just pressure, steady. Reed exhaled. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know." Behind him, the door opened again, Ava's voice cutting through the wind. "They confirmed it. Task force goes public next Thursday. Ranger's keynote profile just got approved." Reed looked down. Ranger blinked, slow and certain, and somewhere behind them, another envelope hit the mailbox. The snow came soft that night. Not a storm, not even wind. Just silence falling layer by layer over the rooftops, trees, fences, and the trail that wound past the old fire tower and opened into the ridge. Marigold Ridge. From up here, the town looked almost like a memory. Soft yellow porch lights flickered below. Smoke coiled gently from chimneys. No sirens, no shadows, just stillness and stars. So many stars. Reed stood alone at first, gloved hands tucked into his jacket pockets, breath misting before him in faint clouds. The scar near his collarbone ached. It always did when it got this cold. But tonight, he didn't mind it. Tonight, it felt like something honest, something earned. Behind him, faint crunching broke the hush. 4 paws, measured, steady. Reed didn't turn. He didn't have to. Ranger padded up to his side, fur dusted with snow. Ears forward. His steps made no demand. Just a presence, a quiet tether that said, "I'm here." Still, they stood like that a long while. Man and dog, soldier and survivor. Both worn by years that had tried to erase them. Both still upright. The sky above stretched wide, ink dark and brilliant. Orion's belt hung perfectly overhead, and the Milky Way braided faintly through the black like an old scar. Reed finally spoke, low and warm. "You remember this place?" Ranger shifted. His breath was slow, heavy, clouding the air in small bursts. He didn't answer, of course, but his gaze lifted, scanning the trees as if he did remember not in words, but in echoes. Maybe a scent, maybe the way the wind touched the bark. "It was right here," Reed continued, voice almost a whisper, "where I came after Dad's funeral. I was 12. Angry. Thought the whole damn world was rigged. He swallowed. I sat right there. He nodded to the boulder dusted in snow. And told the stars I didn't want to become a cop. I didn't want to serve people who could throw lives away like receipts. Ranger looked at him, unblinking. And yet, Reed said softly, a faint smile rising at the edge of his mouth. Here we are. Another long silence passed. Then came a movement so subtle it almost felt imagined. Ranger's head pressed against his leg. Not hard, not to be noticed, just there. A touch that said, "You're not talking to the stars alone anymore." Reed closed his eyes. He'd been wired tight for months. Since the first tip. Since the fire. Since he found Ranger curled and shaking under the rusted pump behind the gas station. It had all unspooled so fast, the stings, the confessions, the weight of justice and memory colliding at every turn. But tonight was the first time he let his lungs fill all the way to the bottom. He opened his eyes and looked down. You ready to rest, partner? Ranger looked up, then nudged his leg again. Not out of pain, not urgency, just acknowledgement. Reed laughed softly under his breath, the kind of laugh you don't share with anyone else. The kind that carries old stories. They started walking. The snow crunched beneath their boots and paws, and the world didn't ask them for anything. No reports, no missions, no echoes of orders barked down a radio. Just the sound of two lives side by side. As they reached the curve that led back toward town, Reed paused. One last glance. Above them, the stars still burned endless and indifferent, as they always had. But something in Reed's chest eased as he looked at them, because this time, they didn't feel so far away. This time, they felt like they were looking back. And maybe, just maybe, they remembered the boy who sat here at 12, and the man who returned with a dog whose loyalty had outlasted war, betrayal, and silence. When we open our lives to a dog, we borrow a little courage, a little faith, and a lot of steadfast love. Shepherds like Ranger remind us that loyalty isn't something we command. It's a quiet promise they choose to keep, morning after morning, no matter what this world throws our way. Their devotion mends what's bruised in us and asks only a gentle hand in return. If you're looking for fresh ways to deepen that bond with your own four-legged companion, maybe new games for aging joints, or simple exercises that build trust, there's a small, reader-friendly guide called Walking Each Other Home. You can find it with a quick search or at most libraries. No rush, no fuss, just thoughtful ideas from folks who love dogs as much as you do. Give it a look whenever your heart feels ready. Then close the book, head outside, and let your pup lead the way. After all, the greatest journeys often begin with a shared step and an open hand.